You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network.
Hello there, and welcome back to Force Perspectives for The Mandalorian, Chapter 24, The Return, the season finale of Chapter 3. I am, of course, your host, Michael Cohen, and joining me for the season finale, one of my absolute favorite people to talk to, really about anything, but most especially about Star Wars, and that is Danielle. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
I I one of the things that I love about having you on the podcast is that like you don't have anything to promote. You don't have like anything like we always talk about your fan fiction and stuff like that, but like you don't have like another show or like Joe is constantly like, "Oh, I've got these art prints that I worked really hard on and they're really really good and you guys should all buy them and stuff." But it's like I don't have to, there's no pressure on me of like, "Oh, I got to make sure that I'm giving you the right avenue to promo your stuff." You're just here to talk to me about Star Wars. That's all this is, right?
Yeah. I'm boring, and this is my social interaction quota.
That's excellent. Yeah, I mean, I put out the message of like, oh boy, I need somebody. This was last week because I had the guest last week. I had to cancel on me at the last minute, and so I tweeted out, oh hey, I need somebody, and you were the second person to respond, and I was like, well, I need somebody next week too. So for the finale, and so it worked out really well that you're here for the finale of season 3 of The Mandalorian. Let's
Yeah.
before we jump into the return, the final chapter for this season, I
Mhm.
want to get, we haven't actually, you and I haven't really talked a lot about The Mandalorian this season. I have been
Yeah.
absolutely loving it, but how have you been feeling about it this season?
Yeah. If we look at it, season 1, season 2, and season 3, by far, season 3 is my favorite of Mando. It was saying a lot of things that I liked. It was teasing a
Mm,
lot of thoughts that otherwise the show hasn't really provoked me to think about.
hmm
Um, um, so yeah, I came into season 3 with being like, okay, fine, I'll watch it." And it didn't tickle every fancy I had, but it was much better um than I was expecting, for sure.
yeah. Yeah, I think that there was um a little bit of trepidation going into season 3 from a lot of
Yeah.
people because of Book of Boba Fett, because Book of Boba Fett was so wildly uneven. Um,
Mm.
I mean, like, I think that was Robert Rodriguez. I like, here's the thing. I love Book of Boba Fett. I like all of it, like the whole thing. I think that it's great. I think it made a lot of mistakes, but I still love it. It's like my
Right.
kids. I but I um but Robert Rodriguez, like, if we look at his oeuvre,
Hmm.
it's consistent. It's consistent with all of that. His stuff is wildly uneven. Now,
Uh-huh.
what that means when I say wildly uneven is that like there are some high highs, there are some low lows, right? Like
Mhm.
the Spy Kids movies are, I think, pretty good for what they
Yeah.
are. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yes,
it's
if
it
you
like
if you set aside this is a kids' film aimed at children,
yeah.
specifically doing silly, wacky things, it's not that bad. I personally like the second Spy Kids myself.
Yeah, like I look at that stuff and I go like, you know, you set out to do a thing and you did the thing, and could it have been better? Absolutely, but you did it, and it's pretty cool.
Mhm.
And it's this. I mean, like I was a little bit old for the Spy Kids movies, and I think so they don't hit as hard for me as I know they do for like the sort of like half step generation that came after us.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I mean, it was
I
definitely my brother is 8 years younger than me, and it was
mhm,
like, I was still kiddish enough to be like, "Yeah, okay. I can watch this." But, I mean, it was aimed more for him, but
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we're exceptions to that rule, right? Of like, well, I like childish things
Yeah.
much more much more than I should. So I don't know if that's actually true. I think maybe everybody could stand to like childish things a little bit more, but
It's
but
always
yeah,
that rough.
yeah, yeah. I but yeah, I think like the majority of people like dismiss stuff like that, but yeah, Book of Boba Fett was just so all over the place. And so I think coming into Mando season 3, and Mando season 2 had some had some serious issues, right?
Yeah,
I
I mean, because with season 1, nobody
Yeah.
really knew what to expect for the most part, and
Hmm.
I came away with like, "Okay, this is interesting. I'm interested to see where it goes." And then season 2 ran, and I really did not find it interesting, to be
Hmm.
honest.
Hmm.
But and then I sat through Book of Boba Fett, and it, like the past scenes, I really enjoyed, and then like
Yeah.
the modern day parts, um, were a little disappointing. And so, coming off of season 2 of Mando, and then coming off of Book of Boba Fett, just in general, it's kind of like,
Yeah.
I'll hear season 3 out, mostly because Anakin, my youngest son, he's getting ready to turn 4 in, about 2 weeks now. He's a big Grogu and Din Djarin fan, so I was like, "Yeah, we'll go ahead and watch it." And, I was pleasantly surprised. Andor kind of restored my Star Wars interest, and,
Hmm.
season 3 of Mando definitely wasn't as strong as Andor by any means, but, it kept me interested, it kept me coming
Yeah.
back, so
Yeah. I so a shift happened for me with Book of Boba Fett where I started to realize that these shows, and this was like prior to Obi-Wan, prior to Andor,
mm,
going like these shows have a certain tone, and
right.
that tone I think is something that people don't expect from Star Wars. Um and and there's this very like it's really interesting how people are so willing to limit Star Wars on when it wants to be lighter or campier, but
Mhm.
not when it wants to be darker, grittier, more mature, right?
Right.
Like if Star Wars wants to do Andor, everybody is fine with that, right? If Star Wars wants to do Rogue One, everybody is fine with that. Nobody bats an eye. As a matter of fact, people are over the moon because they want to see murder in space. I i but when Star Wars says we want to be solo a Star Wars story, people go, "Oh, I don't know. Is this really like the tone of Star Wars?" And it's like, I don't know. It's the most Star Wars thing I think they've done in the Disney era, other than Rebels. Like, I like it to me. Um, like that campy stuff is Star Wars, and
Yeah.
Mando, even in its first season, I think that people have sort of forgotten. They remember it's not been that long, and at the same time, it's been a very long few years. I And people have like already rose tinted glasses for season 1 Mando, but
Mhm.
season 1 Mando is pretty arch in places. Like it gets pretty silly. It gets pretty it gets pretty camp in a few places. Now, not as crazy as season 3 did. Season 3 really, really pushed it. But um season 2 being I the introduction of every side character imaginable so that they could spin them all off into their own shows.
The
Really, I think,
interlude.
yeah, it really kind of it unbalanced that season, right? Like,
Yes,
so it sort of had a
very
very,
much.
it had a very heavy speed wobble of, they were like, they pushed it too fast, too quick, and ended up with a speed wobble. People who don't know what a speed wobble is, it's most commonly on a motorcycle. You get going too fast, and if you get even just like the slightest misstep, right, like the slightest wiggle in your wheel, you can really quickly lose control of the motorcycle. Like, you start a speed wobble and it just like goes, right?
Mhm.
The faster you're going, the smaller the mistake needs to be in order to put you into a bad spot. And so I think that was kind of what season 2 did.
Mhm.
And then season 3 came back and was like, we're focused back on our own story. Everybody else has spun off.
Right.
But the funny thing that happened is that they went, okay, we're going to get back to doing our story. Our story is about this little frog kid and his metal dad,
Yeah.
and they're gonna go to weird places in the galaxy on their adventures. Like, that's what the show is. That's what it was in season 1. That's
Mhm.
really what it was in season 2 as well, right? But it was like, and they're gonna meet all
A
of their
weird
new
way
friends.
about it, yeah.
Yeah. So season 3 goes to do that, and there's this thing of people being like, ugh, season 2, cameos, guest stars, ugh. And then season 3 comes along and goes, um, we're not going to do that. And everybody is like, wait, what? But where's Ahsoka? And where's Cobb Vanth? And where's Luke Skywalker? And where's Boba Fett? And it's like, it's just, there's no winning with some people,
Mhm.
is what I found. Like, there's just no point. And then like that camp factor. It's like, I sit down for this show to watch Batman 1966 in space. That's what I'm doing when I sit down to watch this.
A
Like,
man of refined taste.
yeah, or like Star Trek the original series, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I will, like, cuz I will die on the hill that Star Trek the original series is the best written Star Trek that we've ever gotten. The execution lacks a little bit because the technology isn't there, and the performances are of a time, and
Right.
and some of the writing is in the context of a time, right? But like,
Mhm.
there are episodes in Star Trek the original series that are some of the best written episodes of television ever, and will very likely never be surpassed. Is it the best Star Trek? I don't know about that, right? Like, I would
Right.
say like TNG is better in places. Deep Space Nine is better in places. I hear that Voyager is good, but I hate it, so I'll never be able to confirm that. We don't talk about Enterprise, but Discovery has cool stuff. But Strange New Worlds, I think, is the best Star Trek series. It's so good. I haven't watched any of. I've only watched a couple episodes of Picard, but so I can't really speak to that one. It didn't catch
Mm.
me, but
I hear
but
good things. I hear good things, so
yeah, I hear that it's like, kind of, it found itself later on, but
well,
um
hey, I'll tell you what, side note, little bit of my
yeah.
back history. When I was in college, I took a, philosophy and Star Trek course, and I will have you know that so it was Tuesdays and Thursdays, and on Tuesdays, we would, um, watch an episode of Star Trek that was based off of whatever philosophical thing we were discussing. And then on Thursday, we would actually get down into the what does this actually mean? And then over the
Mhm,
weekend, we would have to write a paper about it. And most of those episodes were from the original
mhm,
series. Okay, some of them were, next gen, but most of them
yeah,
were the original. So there's your fun tidbit.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's because it's so rich with that stuff, right? But
Yeah.
but I look at Mando as having the same sort of tongue in cheek tone as Batman 66 and Star Trek the original series,
Hmm.
and other stuff of that era. That
Right.
is like, hey guys, this is a TV show,
Hmm.
right? Like, Like we're aware, and as a matter of fact, I think it's the thing that Strange New Worlds does the best is that it absolutely winks at the camera every episode and goes like, the guys, this is a TV show, like don't worry so much about it. It's a
Mhm.
TV show, right? Whereas a lot of TV nowadays is like, um these all of these people with white hair, and alabaster skin, who are really obsessed with dragons, like not like the idea of dragons, like literal dragons.
Uh-huh.
They're real people and they make real decisions, and those real decisions are things like, you slighted me and therefore I'm going to poison you and chop off your head. Like, the way that we take that, I'm talking about House of the Dragon, which I haven't watched
Right,
any
right.
of, but
I
like
figured, yeah.
these are just context things that I've gotten from Twitter. Um, we take that and we go like, I wish that these other things could be real, like House of the Dragon. You mean the show where they're like, hey, these are my pet dragons? That show. That's the show that you're talking about? Where do you keep your dragons? Well, in my large island castle. Okay. Okay. Um, how is everybody so clean if you're all living in a castle?
Right,
Like,
right.
it's just, there's nothing real about Game of Thrones. There's nothing real about the first season, the first Game of Thrones series. There's nothing real about the new one. There's nothing real about The Last of Us, right? The
Mhm.
real things in those shows are like the human connection stuff, but the settings are all ridiculous and absurd. What Mando does that's different is that Mando, like Batman 66 and Star Trek, it acknowledges in itself that it is in, like, hey, we're in an absurd setting, you guys. We're in
Mhm.
an absurd setting, but what's the most important thing here? Story and character. Always
Right.
story and character. And this season to me was just like on point story and character. So like when Jack Black and Lizzo show up, is it a quote unquote distraction? No more than the little green frog puppet boy. You
Right.
guys, like, how is Jack Black saying, like, take a sippy sip of your secretions, more distracting than Kermit inside a Gundam, right?
Sure.
Like, because that is also like hitting a yes no button, like in Bluey. Like, put these things in perspective, you guys. Our lead character is a circle, like with a flat bottom on it and a T for a
Mhm.
face. That's our lead character on this TV show.
Yeah.
And he's mostly playing off of other flat bottom circle T faces, right? Like
Right.
like that's the world that we're living in already, and then people, like, will get all like up in arms about like how that this isn't logical, that isn't logical, and it's like, I get it. You're not wrong. I don't think that people are wrong. I just
Mhm.
think that they're like, it's the quote from Harrison Ford that's been coming up a lot recently, where Mark Hamill is like, shouldn't my hair still be wet? We were just in the trash compactor, and I know we've been running around, but like, it hasn't actually been that long. And Harrison turns to him and goes, Mark Hamill always tells this story, and then Harrison turns to him and goes, look, kid, if people are worried about your hair, we're in big trouble. It's not that kind of movie. and
Right.
and I go like, that's like this is the thing. Everybody should know by now. Harrison's grumpy demeanor is a put on. Like, that's not actually him. He loves Star Wars. He's just
Yeah.
wants people to leave him alone. I get it. I get it. But
So,
like he gets it, right? And so we should all
yeah.
get it too.
Well, I mean, so, like, okay, so today's season final episode,
Yeah.
overall, I enjoyed it, but the thing is, so there's been certain parts throughout the series where, they put their helmet on and there's the hissing air, air pressurized
Yeah.
sound effect tacked onto it. And there was not actually much of that going on in this episode, despite a lot of people very quickly putting their helmets on. Another thing that jumped out at me was, okay, they're getting, I get the Beskar or Beskar is supposed to, deflect the bullets and that sort of thing, but they're being shot at in the torso area and in the arm joint area where there is no Beskar, yet they're still karate kicking everyone, and they've just been flamethrowed, but their cape is not catching on fire, and that's not made out of
Mhm,
Beskar.
mhm, mhm.
And oh, well, now Axe Wolves is flying into space, but his suit's not pressurized. So how is his body not decompressing and his veins are not freezing? So, you know, if you wanted to get technical about it, those are all things that are jumping out to me, and I'm like, that makes no sense, and that makes no sense, and that makes no sense. But at the same time, I'm like, you know what? This very heavy looking droid flying through a cave mouth on these two tiny little rockets that clearly do not have enough propulsion to lift this droid.
Mhm.
Um, I'm just going to have to accept that that is, and that is the part of Star Wars. Does every single planet only have one biome? Yes, apparently, even though that's not very realistic. And it's just something you go in and you just have to accept. And
Yeah.
I had to make peace with that.
Yeah. I'm trying to find a tweet from earlier, and hopefully I'll be able to find it at some point while we're recording so that I can give proper credit. But I read this morning, and it was basically along the lines of the finale was like I emotionally satisfying but logically inconsistent or something like that, right? And
Mhm.
I was like, you can't put it better than that. Like, absolutely 100%. When just starting at the beginning of the episode, right? It's like the super troopers are these new Mando dark troopers are carting Mando off, and he starts fighting back against them or whatever, and he's doing all right, but they are going to get the upper, like the one's going to get the upper hand. And then
Mhm.
Grogu shows up just out of nowhere. Grogu shows up, just Deus Ex
Yeah.
Machina, right?
Yeah.
And my brain, as I'm sitting there at midnight, this is probably like 5 minutes in, so it's like 12:05, and I'm sitting there, and Grogu shows up, and I literally caught myself because my brain goes, wait, how did Grogu know where, how did he catch, wait, what? And then it, because it's like, because the IG arm comes in, and
Yeah.
everything happens or whatever,
Yeah.
but then it like cuts to Grogu's face, and the second that it cut to Grogu's face, I went, why do I care?
Right.
Like, why do I care about that detail? Right? Like, what?
Mhm.
So he found them. He found them. He's a Jedi. I don't know. He
The
can
Force.
sense where Din is.
The Force.
Like if we need to, we can figure it out.
Mhm.
But did we need to in this finale? And there's a lot of stuff in this finale where it's like, if we need to, we can figure this out. But do we need to? Right?
Right.
And the answer so often with Star Wars is, do we need to? And I know that sometimes doesn't work for people. And there's something that Marie Claire says, which is that basically, like, when you borrow the mythology and then like don't pay it off, and it creates that dissonance, like that's a
Yeah.
it's a problem. And I agree, like I 100% agree. That stuff is the stuff where I think we can look at this critically and go, did this nail this or that or whatever, right? and
Mhm.
and that's the sort of discussion that I'd like to have. But the stuff of like exactly what you're saying of like, so this little droid like comes rocketing down out of nowhere, which, like, we didn't establish that R5 came with them. Why is he on the surface of the planet? Like, none
Yeah.
of this was none of this was established last week, even though it easily could have been. Um
Yeah, I
I
mean, he coulda when Din told him to go down into the hole and check for breathable air, which, duh, it's Star Wars, everybody knows the air is
Yeah.
breathable, um, like, he fell down a hole, and now today I'm like, "Well, hold on, he coulda used his little rocket pieces to, like,
Yeah.
boost himself up."
But like, it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, like, the little rockets are neat. The little rockets are neat. It's
Yeah,
cool that R2 did it. It's cool that R5 does it.
yeah.
It's cool, right? It
Mhm.
also, like, listen, it makes as much sense as Iron Man because like I'm sorry, he does what? So he's got like um repulsor repulsors. Well, what's a repulsor? Well, it's because he's got the arc reactor. Oh, because he has the arc reactor. So that's the science. The repulsors can do what the repulsors do because the arc reactor is powering them. Well, guys, the arc reactor is made up in nonsense. What's the
Yeah.
arc reactor? Because if you look at the arc reactor, it's an electromagnet. That's what it is, right? Construction wise, when we look at it in the movie, it's an electromagnet. For some
Mhm.
reason, it's an incredibly powerful electromagnet that generates electricity. It generates energy, and Iron Man's able to do the stuff that he can do. Why? Why can he do that? Because the story necessitates it, you guys. Because
Mm.
if he doesn't, then he's not Iron Man. And what are we doing here? Right? Like
Right.
that's why the whole thing centers around made up silly thing in Iron Man's chest, right? And
Mhm.
so then everything is built. Uh in uh in legal terms, it's referred to as the fruit of the poisonous tree, right? So if if the basis of, so it's like if I break a law because I've signed a contract that, and the contract is that actually has like clauses in it that are illegal, right? So it's like if I don't do this, you'll murder me. It's like
Mhm.
I can't be bound to that contract. So it's like well, I did it because the contract said that I had to murder this person because otherwise they would murder me. And it's like, well, that contract's null and void. You also can't like blame your actions on this, right? Like it's like we have to look, like you go down to the root of it or whatever. I've explained this really poorly, but basically it's like you can go back to the source and go like, is it is it flawed, is it incorrect, is it immoral or like stupid from the genesis of it? If so, then everything that comes after it, good intentioned or ill intentioned, is also, it's also bad, right?
Mhm.
Because it's the fruit of the poisonous tree. And this is like Star Wars, the suspension of disbelief when we get into it is uh outer space, magic wizards, laser swords. Like there's a lot of stuff here that I think because of the sci-fi trappings, people get caught up in the sci-fi of it. They want it to be a Star Trek, even though Star Trek is fantasy as well. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a utopian society consisting of human beings. It's pure fantasy, but
Oh, yeah.
uh,
Oh, yeah.
it's as much as Lord of the Rings, right? But like Star Wars is very specifically space fantasy. It's not sci-fi, right? It's a space opera.
Yeah.
So like the suspension of disbelief should actually be higher. The threshold should be higher than what I think a lot of people go into it with. And Andor really messed up that calibration, right? Like
Mm.
it because Andor is not a Star Wars show. I've been saying this all season. Andor is a really great Blade Runner TV show that just happens to take place in the Star Wars universe for some reason.
Yes.
But it's not a Star Wars show. It's actually missing a whole bunch of elements of Star Wars in order for me to fully consider it like successful Star Wars. I think it's fantastic and I love it, and I think that like it absolutely has its place in Star Wars. But it's as much Star Wars to me as like the um do you remember when they did those like stormtrooper zombie novels back in like the early 2000s, where it was
Oh, no,
like,
I don't remember those.
oh, they did like 3 or 4 of these because zombies were, because Walking Dead, and it was all so huge. So they were like, let's do some
Uh, See, I
stormtroop
hate
stories about
zombies, so I
stormtrooper
don't pay
zombies.
attention to that.
Yeah. They're not I don't personally think that they're very good.
Yeah.
And I also don't think that like that type of horror necessarily fits in Star Wars. Because zombie stories are to tell a certain type of story, and Star Wars is to tell a certain type of story, and those are kind of polar opposites. And
Mm.
Andor to me is much closer to those zombie things than it is to mainline Star Wars, and that's fine. Like it's like we can actually have all of it, and it's okay because like I think I said this last week. Like we've also got Young Jedi Adventure is coming, right? Which is
Mhm.
the polar opposite from Andor, and that's cool.
Yeah.
Mando is just like straight down the middle, and that's where I want to be with Star Wars. Is I want sippy sips of secretions. I want I ridiculous aliens. I want droid bars. I
Well, I think
and one
being live
starfighter.
action
You know,
too, in
yeah,
that regard, is a bit of a, I suppose, a detriment because especially in season 3, we get a lot of, prequel vibes and references and nods, and if you look at the Clone Wars episodes, a lot of things are being done similarly, as was being done in season 3 of Mando.
yeah,
And, not many people question that format, as it's being presented, like you said. And I guess because that's animation, so people
yeah,
kind of, like, put it on a lower rung shelf of, like, "Oh, well, it's like that because it's animated." And then by some bizarre default, animation is more child-related mentally. And so when you put it in a live action state, people, go, "This is for adults." And then they get that, um, bit of Clone Wars flair, and they're kind of like, "Well, this is silly."
yeah.
But I mean, it's still what it is. It is Star Wars, and you're gonna get those episodes, in Clone Wars that are very serious, saying serious things, only it's in cartoon format. And then you're gonna get moments of like droids being ridiculous and falling down, or, some cute fuzzy
Mhm.
animal doing something silly, or pomp and circumstance like that. So it's the same thing. It's just in a different visual medium. And I think the hate for it comes in that fact that our standards and ideas of what it should be are different because of that,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
unfair.
I've seen a bunch of people also. This is sort of like it's like people are warming up to get mad at Ahsoka before it even starts. Um,
Mm,
I've seen a lot of people like that have this sentiment of like they're mad that the Rebels sequel isn't animated, right? That Ahsoka is
right.
essentially the Rebels sequel and that it's not animated, it's live action, as if it's somehow like talking down to the animated stuff. And I personally don't see it that way. Like I'm very excited to see the interpretation of these characters in live action. I'm very
Mhm.
excited to see other actors play these characters.
Yeah,
And for that to expand what these characters mean and can be. Um I there are aspects of it where I'm like, yeah, I mean, it would have been cool if so and so could have played their character. I really think that Vanessa Marshall should be playing Hera personally. Like I think that she has the right presence. Having been in the same room with her, it's like she is Hera. Hera is Vanessa Marshall.
right.
Um, in a way that like as much as I love Tia Sircar as Sabine, I don't feel
Mhm.
as strongly about that character in that sense, right? So I'm interested to see what I can never remember her name. I'll learn it by the time the series is on. But but this actress that's playing Sabine, it's like I'm interested to see what her take's going to be. I
Hmm.
also I also quite like what Rosario Dawson is doing with the character of Ahsoka. Like I think that there's room for that character to have that interpretation along with the interpretation that was um, cemented by Ashley Eckstein, right?
Right,
And,
yeah.
and originated with her. And it's like in the same way, I don't know. I guess for me, like my perspective is very simple because I love Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Mhm.
Absolutely, anybody listening to this podcast should know. Anybody who knows me, it's like he's my favorite character in all of media, right?
Right.
Obi-Wan is like my everything. So um I live in a world where that character is above and beyond the actors that have played him.
Mhm.
And I love all of them. Well, I shouldn't say all of them. There have been a couple of odd choices with, not odd choices, but just like less than stellar performances with Obi-Wan over the years. But for the most part, I mean, like when we're talking about the big ones, right? Obviously, Alec Guinness, Ewan McGregor, James Arnold Taylor, Stephen
Mm.
Stanton, like those four actors having played that character in the most notable forms. I like, but they're all Obi-Wan, right?
Right.
And even
Yep.
within that, like you've got two live action performers and you have two voice actors. And would I have loved for James Arnold Taylor to have played Obi-Wan in Star Wars Rebels? Sure. And I think he would have done a great job. I think he would have done just as good a job as Stephen Stanton. But the thing is that Stephen Stanton like comes in out of nowhere and nails the Alec Guinness Obi-Wan. Like
Yeah.
nails the Alec Guinness Obi-Wan. And I don't mean that he does a good impersonation. I mean like the gravitas of Alec
Right.
Guinness is
Yeah.
felt in that performance in that episode. And that episode is so important, right? So for me, it's like I look at it and I go it's all that matters at the end of the day is story and character. That's
Right.
it. Like that is it. And whatever medium we use to tell it, whatever actor is in the role, all I care about is that we do a good job, right? Like
Right.
it's I always go back to Shakespeare and it's like, is seeing Hamlet somehow lesser because we're not watching the actor who first played Hamlet,
Mhm.
right? No, no. Is it lesser when you see Hamlet, even if it's like not the actor that you first saw play Hamlet, like just for your own reference? No, right? Like, is it different from when you read it? Like, it's the story and character is always there. You just want a performance that's going to do justice, and you just want a like direction that's going to do justice, right, to the
Mhm.
story, and that's going to get it across and help us feel something, learn something, experience it, right?
Right.
So for
Well,
me,
I think
that's what matters.
yeah. Well, I think too people have to be understanding. I don't know how much money goes into a live action, 8 episode show versus,
Hmm.
an animated one, but it is my assumption that the animated one is not only going to take a whole lot longer, but it's going to cost a whole lot more because of that fact. Whereas with a live action show, I mean, sure, there's a lot of cost to it, but I would think it would be less because you can get all that stuff done in a shorter amount of time.
Hmm.
And so, and plus, too, again, the live action being more of like an kids and adults thing, it markets better than an animated show would, which I think is why they're making that call to do it. You know, the Rebels sequel is a live action,
Yeah.
and you're right. At the end of it, all that really should matter is those actors portraying those characters tried to keep it as true to form as possible, while understandably still bringing their own to it. But the story needs to match. And I think that's partially why the animated shows, for the most part, seem to have pretty consistent story and character, is because the animation is taking so long to craft, the story, um, board artists and the writers themselves are given a bit more time to flesh out what it is they're wanting to
Hmm.
say, because they have to make sure they say what they say, because otherwise the budget's going to go all over the place.
Yeah.
Whereas with live action, it's kind of like, okay, well, we can schedule it on this day. So they don't have as much time to really sit down and go, do I need to say this? Because there's that illusion of I can just do it the next day, or I can write it the day of or something. So there's that
Yeah.
less self-control of the topic.
And I think the volume being in play with Mando specifically, I think even like further adds to that element of it,
Mhm.
These episodes can kind of come together like in the room a little bit more
Oh,
than
absolutely.
other, because like they're in the physical digital space, right? Like they're in this like weird hybrid of like, okay, we got to do a lot of prep in order to get here, but once we're here, we can play jazz a little bit. Like we can goof with this a little bit and go off book and, you know, like add this or add that or change this or change that.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
I think that you do get a little, where you're right, when you're in animation, you have to have a plan and you have to execute the plan. And you see it go wrong as well, right?
Yeah.
I always point at Brave is a really good example of a movie that they it went through, I think, like 5 directors. It was
Mhm.
rewritten like a billion times. They changed that story so much that by the time that you watch that movie, it's like the first third of it is one movie, the second third of it is another movie, and the last third is a completely different movie. And
Yeah.
you're like, it's just so dissonant with itself. And that's what happens when that aspect of of animation goes too far.
Mhm.
But it's funny because I think that we have a little bit of the same problem on Mando sometimes, where it's like, uh, I think sometimes I know that people are like, oh, we need a bigger writers' room and you know, like other people for John to whatever. It's like sometimes I think actually, uh, if if it were just a singular voice, or even like a duo, right? Of like if it was
Mhm.
like John Favreau writing and then somebody else directing,
Mhm.
I think Mando might actually be tighter, because when you look at Obi-Wan, I know that some people don't feel like it's the best Star Wars, but Obi-Wan is consistent.
Yes.
Um, like
Wholeheartedly.
it's
Yeah.
very consistent. I throughout it. And that's Deborah Chow, right? Like that's Deborah
Yep.
Chow being a very steady hand on that show,
Yep.
to the extent that it feels like a 6 hour movie, not like a show, right? Like
Mhm.
I want to go back and rewatch it. As a matter of fact, we're gonna cover it on the podcast,
Nice.
but I haven't gone back since, I think, like the third time that I watched it through, which was pretty soon after it finished. Like it kind of finished, and then I went through and did a full rewatch. Because because I know that that's what I'll want to do, is I'll want to just sit and watch it. I'll just want to, like, so I don't know. I kind of feel like I have to block out a day and just go, okay, I'm just gonna watch Obi-Wan today. I think to be honest, I think I might do it for my birthday, because it'll be around the 1 year anniversary of
Nice.
the series. Because we saw that first episode on the 27th of May, which is
Mhm.
3 days after my birthday. So it's a
Yeah,
wonderful
I
birthday
mean,
present I got from Lucasfilm last year.
it definitely shows when they have, pretty much one singular voice
Hmm.
working on the show. Deborah Chow with Obi-Wan, Tony Gilroy with Andor. It whether you love it, hate it, or in
Hmm.
between, you can tell that, you know, they had an idea and they knew what they wanted to say, and then they went about saying it, and there
Hmm.
wasn't too many other people chiming in, well, this would be cool to add, or this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's definitely noticeable. I kind of wish it would be that way more often.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to always is that your story has to have a purpose.
Yes.
um and this season with Mando, it had a purpose. I do feel like it had a purpose, and that purpose was getting us to uh the last couple of scenes. And
Mhm.
so there were a lot of like sort of like fast forward moments, where it's like, well, okay, all of a sudden we're here. Okay, that's fine. That's you know, I thought that was going to take 2 or 3 episodes, but that's fine. It's fine, because they're like, well, we've got 8 episodes this season, and this is what we're going to do with those 8 episodes, and this is where we're going to end. So I think that, like, I do think that, like, John definitely started at the shot of Mando and Grogu on the homestead, and then worked his way backwards. How do we get here?
Mm,
How do we get
mhm,
there?
mhm.
I think actually that goes as far back as what happened in Book of Boba Fett. So for me, it's like, to be perfectly honest, if that's why, I'm totally fine with it, because the way that this season ends, we're jumping all over the place. We've talked a little bit about the beginning of the episode. Now we're going to talk about the end, but though that final shot, and I literally mean that final shot, those closing seconds of the episode, and Rick Famuyiwa, I could kiss you on the mouth when that circle irises in Looney Tunes style on Grogu and does like the little bounce, squash, and stretch, and then zips closed. I was like, that is both like the biggest, like, we love you to fans like me, and middle finger to the people who have a problem with this season. Like,
Mm,
it is both things where it's like, it is absolutely thumbing its nose, and it's going like, guys, this show's a cartoon. It always has
yeah,
been. Get over it. Star Wars is silly. Star Wars is silly. It's dumb. It's nonsense. Laser swords are obnoxious, right?
right.
Like, the thing that you think is the coolest thing in Star Wars is actually very silly. Mel Brooks pointed this out many decades ago, and you guys have not been paying attention, right?
Right.
When the Schwartz get wrapped, I mean, like, it's, so just put your leg up here, right? Uh, yeah, I don't know. I think that people need to take it less seriously. I think they need to have more fun with it, and also just like kind of let some of the stories be what they're gonna be, and not
Sure.
try and force them to be what you want them to be.
Well
Let's
well,
do.
I mean,
Sorry,
if
go
I'm
ahead.
being honest, I think whether it works out for them or not, I think
Yeah.
Lucasfilm is truly trying to figure out what to do with what they've got and what to make
Mm,
of it because going in, it was kind of like, okay, we've got this idea of a Mandalorian going out and doing this rogue thing, and wouldn't it be cool if he found a kid? It's the lone wolf finds its cub story. We know how this goes, and so they craft it and they put it out there, and it's a hit, and they're like, okay, great. Now what do we do with it? And so somebody else has an idea of like, well, wouldn't it be cool if we expanded, rebels or wouldn't this be another cool idea? Which is how we got season 2. It was a conglomerate of all these ideas and, well, what if we tie it in to this? And so now they're kind of formulating a plan for going forward and they're using this big hit to kind of steer the ship sort of. And then now that they've done crafted a path forward where they think it's going to go, then they're like, "Okay, well, how do we now that that's been established and is getting
mhm,
ready, the snowball is growing, how do we come back to this other story?" And, well, if we're looking at the bigger picture now, let's instead of just this one lone guy, why don't we turn it into all of the Mandalorians? And then how would that affect the rest of the galaxy? And if our Rebels crew is going over here to do this, what if as a whole the Mandalorians are over here doing that? And then how would that affect the galaxy going forward into this new era, which obviously at Star Wars Celebration, we got the reveal that David Filoni would be directing a film that would be a culmination of these new things. So I
mhm,
think that's why it kind of seems so scattered is they tried the one thing, it worked, and they were like, oh, cool. What can I build off of it? And then they were like, "Okay, now I've got, my string board all going all over the place. How do I tie it all together?" And so I think we're kind of in the middle of that. So it'll be interesting to see because I don't think they've said if there's a season 4 of Mando, have they?
no, we haven't gotten like an announcement of a season 4, but I
Mhm.
mean, so this is one of the things, and I think that people need to wake up to this fact a little bit. Disney is a business first and
Right.
foremost. I mean, like, it's not. I do think that Disney as a company, as a corporation, does have a solid ideology behind it, and I do think that it does have a good moral compass. It's just that like any company with a moral compass, it just loses it every now and then. Listen, you can still get lost with a compass, right? Like go out
Mhm.
into the woods, you can
That's
still get
true.
lost even if you've got a compass. And so when Disney does stuff that's a little bit off of its own morality, I it just gets lost in the woods every once in a while, and it takes a
Mhm.
minute for it to figure out its way. But when you put out something like Willow, like it's not a completely morally bankrupt company, otherwise it wouldn't produce stuff like that.
Right.
And so I but it is a company, right? It's a corporate entity, and that corporate entity is beholden to shareholders, and and that's who Bob Iger works for. He doesn't work for the creatives. He doesn't work for the customers. He works for the shareholders.
Uh-huh.
And so there's an ebb and flow, there's a pattern, there's a cadence to how these things are done, because they have very real and significant effects on stock prices.
Mhm.
So I you don't just announce that Mando is going to be a 6 season series, because that's one announcement.
Right.
Because and here, everybody, this is a little tip. This is a little tip. Watch what happens. Keep your eye on Disney's stock. Take a look at it over the course of the next couple of days, sort of get a feel of it. When they announce season 4 of The Mandalorian, check in on Disney's stock, because I guarantee you that day in particular, but in sort of an overall sense, it will have made a jump for the positive, right?
Mhm.
Um, and then wait for an investors call. And when the investors call happens and Bob Iger comes on and says, we're going to be very conservative about this, and if you watch, because he sort of circles around things. Oh, we're going to be a
Yeah.
little bit, we're going to sort of tone down some of this park expansion stuff, because we've been going too hard on that. So we're going to kind of tone that down right now, because the parks aren't generating as much revenue as they need to. So we're going to focus more on operations and less on expansion, right? And that's like, that was one thing that they talk about is post pandemic there was a lot of that. And then
Mhm.
as the pandemic, I mean, hey, COVID's still out there, by the way, but as the pandemic has slowed down and life has returned somewhat to normal, whatever that means, um the parks have started to rebound. And now that the parks are rebounding, there's this issue with soft box office, because the Marvel movies aren't making as much money as they need to, and we haven't put out a Star War in a while, because of
Mhm.
what happened with that last one that they put out and the one that they put out before that.
Uh-huh.
I yeah. So um I now we're having a conversation in the most recent one of, we're going to be a little bit more conservative, we're going to be a little bit more cautious with our films. We're going to focus more on quality and less on quantity, because we've just been moving too fast, we've been putting out too much, and I think that the product is suffering as a result, right? That's the
Yeah.
message,
And he's
right?
not
And
wrong.
he's not wrong. And he comes out and he says it, and the stock price goes up, right? Because the
Yep.
investors all go, okay, cool, sounds good, steady as she goes, let's put more money in, right? It's gonna
Mhm.
be good. It's gonna be good. We're gonna make less movies, but we're gonna make movies that make more money, and that's what we're after, because we're gonna make more
Right.
money in the long run, right? It's less investment and more return.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me, right? Financially, it all makes sense. So let's put more money in. They do that, the stock goes up. I and then like 2-3 weeks later, I think, I don't even know if it was that long since the investors call, we have Star Wars Celebration. And at Star Wars Celebration, what happens? We don't come out and say that we've canceled anything, by the way. Like nothing
Yeah.
has been officially canceled by Disney, not even Rogue One, even, or not Rogue One, sorry, Rogue Squadron. Even
Yeah,
though, like,
yeah.
I think we all know Rogue Squadron is not happening, there isn't like I don't have a press release from Disney, as far as I know, of like, we're not making that movie, right? They just kind of let it fizzle, because you
Yeah,
don't make those announcements, because when you make those announcements, the stock price goes down. But
yeah.
you do come out and you say, we're going to make a movie with Dave Filoni, we're going to make a movie with James Mangold, because we've seen the early stuff on Indiana Jones, and this movie's going to make a lot of money. And so we're going to capitalize on that and make a Star Wars with them as well. And also, here's Daisy Ridley. And here's Daisy
Yeah.
Ridley. The stock price jumps up real high because everybody loses it, right? That's big Hollywood news, right? So
Mhm.
that's where we're at. And so Mando season 4, just like Bad Batch season 3, it was like, well, Celebration's coming. We're going to talk about that. Well, May the 4th is coming, right? Like
Mhm.
give it a little bit. We'll have next week will be, I think, quiet, and then the week after that we might get the gallery Mando season 3, the Disney gallery for Mando season 3,
Yeah, and season 2 of Visions.
and then we've got season 2 of Visions coming, as well as Young Jedi Adventures, right? So
Yeah.
like we got a bunch of new Star Wars coming, but somewhere around there, like post that, we'll get a season 4 announcement, or we are due for something, right? Because if you look at Celebration, there was a lot of updates on TV shows, but I don't know if
Mhm.
there were any announcements of new TV shows. I
Right.
can't. I can't think of one, right? But what we are going
No.
to,
I
yeah.
mean, other than season 2 of Andor, no, I don't think there was anything
But that
new.
was a foregone conclusion, right? We already
Right,
knew that was
yeah,
happening.
yeah,
So
and then there was Ewan McGregor hoping for a season 2 of
yeah.
Obi-Wan, but nothing was set in stone.
So I think what we will end up getting in the next 3 to 4 weeks is an announcement of season 4 of Mando, or season 2 of Book of Boba Fett. Um,
Mhm.
and that because we know the next few things, but we also know that like that really only takes us into next year,
Yeah.
because we've got Ahsoka next, and then we've got Skeleton Crew, and then we've got
Mhm.
Acolyte, and then I guess presumably Andor season 2.
Yeah.
Um, and we don't know how many seasons Ahsoka is going to be. We don't know how many seasons Skeleton Crew is, right? And we've now Book of Boba Fett. It's presumably will be more than one volume, right?
Yeah.
But I yeah, because I think that what we'll end up doing is checking in with those characters. Again, we're jumping all over the place because I just wanted to note that like I don't think that we're gonna see Din and Grogu until we can explain a time jump. I think the next
Yeah,
time,
I sus with the way today's final ended, there's
yeah,
definitely going to be a time jump for sure.
the next time that we see them, I think he will be speaking.
Mhm,
I
I agree.
I I think it'll have been a significant chunk of time, and I
And I
think that
think
it
we
will
need
be a new
to.
puppet. Yeah, I mean, I think that we needed to, even before this season, and I think that was addressed in the last 2 episodes with the IG-12 yes no,
Mhm,
right? Like
yeah.
so it's like they're very clearly aware of like this character needs to grow. Um and the way that the episode ends was like it's a that circle in is a see you later, we're done. But then when it pauses, does the little bounce
Yeah,
and then zips in is a for now, right? It's
yeah,
like this is the end of the story for now. We'll be back. Don't
yeah.
worry. Grogu's coming back. Grogu's not going anywhere. But go focus on Ahsoka. Go focus on Skeleton Crew, which has an Ortolan in it. So like, don't worry. We've got stuff to put on the lunchbox. I like we've got a Tuca like Lothcat in Ahsoka. We've got like don't worry. There's going to be plenty of merch for all of this stuff. We can pump the brakes on Grogu a little bit. As a matter of fact, from a merchandising perspective, it is past time
It's needed,
to pump
yeah.
the brakes on that. Like the market's oversaturated, and now I walk in places and I just see piles of Grogu merch that nobody's buying.
Yes.
Um, so
Except for my
like
mother. I'm pretty sure my
yeah.
mother's the one that's buying it all.
So, so yeah, I think that we're due for some new stuff. Hey, Nubs is coming, guys. He's just weeks away. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. There's always something to put on the lunchbox, right?
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I definitely think there's gonna be a season 4, bare minimum. Whether they do a second Boba Fett or not, I don't know, but, I mean, definitely as we get closer to, like, a, "Hey, Dave Filoni's film is coming," I definitely think there will be a season 4 that will kind of be a
mhm.
tie-in to this is happening, go see the movie sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And by
Um,
then it'll have been enough distance of time to where Grogu will have aged up to
yeah.
be more of a part of it than just a floating green baby.
Yeah. I think I think Ahsoka and Skeleton Crew actually give the perfect opportunity for us to step away, right?
Mhm.
Of like
Yeah, yeah.
we're quite literally going to a different part of the galaxy, and we're going to see some perspectives on a different part of the galaxy. Book of Boba Fett was not far away enough, right? Like Book of Boba Fett was adjacent to
Yeah,
Mando because
yeah,
it's another T face. And it's a planet that Din's been to with
right.
Grogu, and we're gonna
Yeah.
see familiar faces with Peli and stuff like that, right? So, it's Tatooine, right? Like every time we go to Tatooine, it's like, come on, everybody. Sooner or later, everybody ends up walking through Tatooine.
This
Like it,
place again.
yeah. Um, so yeah, I think like Book of Boba Fett didn't get us far enough away, but Ahsoka is going to. It's going to get us into the unknown regions and out of the outer rim. So I think like that will be a great excuse of like, and I know that some people are kind of like, oh, I think maybe they're setting up that Din and Grogu could show up in Ahsoka. And I don't think so. I it's not their story. Ahsoka needed to show up in Grogu's story. That was that if she's around in that time period,
Yeah.
she's got to
Yeah,
show up, right?
and as weird and as, inserted as it was, she did for the most part serve a purpose
Hmm.
in season 2 of Mando, so
Yeah,
I like, it felt weird having her there, but she did have a purpose, and, for the most part, it worked.
yeah. Less so. I think in Book of Boba Fett, right?
Yeah, yeah,
but yeah, but for Mando season 2, I think it was good. But but yeah, let's get into the nitty gritty of this episode because we kind of talked. We've bookended it, but let's talk about the meat of it.
sure.
Um,
It was a video game.
yeah, 100%, a
Yeah,
hundred
like
percent.
like
The
I
man,
I
the
I
yeah,
started
Din
watching
stuff
it.
was.
So, I'm gonna start off by saying I did like the episode,
Mhm.
but, my takeaway level of excitement was the same as watching Bob Ross paint trees, and I kept thinking, "Okay, here's your intro cutscene, always been saved. Okay, now it goes back to the player, and the player's running through the halls. We're doing a stealth sneak, trying to avoid these guys. Okay, here's a level." And I kept thinking of Jedi, I guess because Jedi Survivor is coming out, but it reminded me a lot of Fallen Order. So the little droid goes over and turns
Yeah.
the thing, and then you go through each level, and they have a different weapon, and so now you have to use different mechanics to go past it, and okay, now you've got the boss, but it's kind of like you're on the back foot, you're not sure, you think you can win, but you don't know, and then randomly a cutscene comes in, and everything gets crazy weird, and then you gotta like step 2 of the boss, level 2 of the boss fight, and then you fight through that for a bit, and then at the very end, it's whether you don't win or not, or you're gonna lose, then there's a really long, like, Final Fantasy style cutscene where it just takes forever, and then you're done, and I'm
Yeah.
like, "Well, yeah, that was just a video game episode. Okay then." So
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah, it was very like Metal Gear Solid, sneaking around the base.
uh
But I did love I love how we all after last week were like, "Oh my god, like they have to rescue Din. Now he's the damsel in distress." And then
Yeah.
this episode starts and it's like they can make it like 10 steps down the hallway and he looks at this guy and the other guy and goes, "Oh, I can take these guys." And just like and just houses the one guy, just like just murders him, just like snaps his neck.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and I'm confident he would have found his way out of the other one, but then Grogu shows up, right?
yeah.
And we're good. And I'm just like, yeah, yeah, that's Din. That's Din. Like you just like this guy, you cannot count him out. You just can't. He's gonna do what it takes to get the job done.
Yeah, there was a
Um,
lot of nods to season 1 this time
yeah,
around. The fact
yeah,
that he was pretty much capable fighter, and that Grogu saves them from the fire blast again.
Yeah. It's just I think it's funny because I think over the course of this season, because he's been out of his element, um and like we've been sort of like going from place to place, and he's been taking a back seat to other characters, that
Mhm.
there was an aspect of like everybody thinking that he'd like somehow weakened, and then this episode was like, no, no, he's Din Djarin, you guys. Like this guy is pretty formidable. Like there's some stuff that he's not so great at, like free thinking, not one of his strong suits, right? Like he's like my shoelace is undone. Armorer, what should I do?
Yeah.
And then she's like, well, the great path of the Mandalore tells us, tie your shoe, Din, tie your shoe. Like everything needs to be a religious lesson for him. But you put him in a hallway with a person who's trying to hurt him, and he's like, oh, I can deal with this, I can
Yeah.
handle this. And so yeah, he was like, he comes up on the laser gates, and he's like, oh, a series of hallways with people that want to hurt me, I can do this. And it's like open the gate and then do the next one and the next one and the next one. But yeah, it was funny because like we got there and I was like, oh no, what's he gonna do with all these guys? And then he's like, oh, it's okay, I got this.
Yeah.
And we just have the Deus Ex Machina, literally, of a machine that comes to save the day in the form of R5, who's
Yeah.
just like, I'll just scomp link this or whatever. And we get the great comedic scene of like the one mouse droid. I look, it ramps up and it gets sillier and sillier as it goes, and I love it. But that first one, when R5 lands, and he
And
kind of
he's
zips
hiding from it.
over. Yeah, and he kind of peeks to see like, is the coast clear, and the one stormtrooper goes by, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna wait, and then he kind of peeks again, and then he zips across.
Yeah.
Zips across that little hallway, like, oh,
Typical.
no, nothing to see here. It's just the performance on that droid in this episode was top tier Star Wars droid.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
that was like, R5 has this week for me, because like like I don't have a problem with R5 and any of the other stuff that he's done this season or last season or whatever, right, since he's been introduced in the show. um but this episode gave R5 like the R2 Chopper BB-8 level of
Mhm.
personality, where it's
Yeah.
like he R5 is now distinct from those other characters that I just mentioned, even though like all four of them are essentially the same character, right? But
Mhm.
especially in terms of physicality, like very, very similar. But then they all have their nuance, right? They all
Yeah.
like R2 is the standard, R2 is the default, he's the Leonardo, right? He's even blue. Um, so he's the one that we're going to judge the other ones on. Chopper takes R2 and goes, what if R2 was mean, right?
Right.
BB-8 takes R2 and goes, what if R2 was a little kid, right? So he was more playful and a
Yeah.
little bit more like silly and expressive. And then R5 has now taken R2 and gone, but what if R2 was a coward? Because R2 is courageous. R2 is Lassie, right? Like
Yep.
like
Yep.
like goes down into the mine to save you when it collapses, right? But what if R2D2 was scared? And that's who R5 is. But he's still R2, right? He's still an astro droid. So he's
Mhm.
still got that little bit of like, adventures in my blood. I just don't like it. Right.
Right.
So it's like, as I love that, like as soon as his job is done, he's like, all right, I'm
I'm
out of
out.
here. And he just rockets away. And it's like, but yeah, that moment when he zips across the hall to get to the scomp link, and it's like, why don't you just land on the other side? Right. But it's like, but because we need that little bit of like Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton comedy of
Mhm.
the whistling nonchalant, nothing to see here, sort of attitude from this little droid. But they nailed it. They brought so much to that character this week,
Oh, yeah.
and really like made me love him as this counterpoint to Din and Grogu. It's like that. It's just I love this little family unit that we've got with these characters. Like I just love how everybody ends up fitting into that family aspect of it. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that was
they just
definitely
nailed it.
one of my favorite aspects of this season,
Yeah.
for sure.
Um, I let's talk. We've talked a lot about Din and Grogu, but let's talk about the Bo-Katan stuff.
Mm,
So they kind of turn tail and run, right?
yep.
They get out of there through an action sequence, blow some stuff up. Cool, that's fine. Very Mandalorian of them. They
Yeah.
rocket away, and then the survivors are like, "Hey, I know where we can hide." And this scene might feel to a lot of people like it was pointless, but I think it was pointless for the finale. It didn't have any effect on the finale, but it's going to be
Yeah.
very, very, very important when we see the Mandalorians again. And
Yes.
that's they land in this little garden grove area, and Casca and Bo are both kind of like, this is like, what is this? Like, you guys found a garden.
What is
And
grass?
yeah, and well, because like, and Bo says it, which I really appreciate that she says it out loud, which is that, um, like the surface is not supposed to be inhabitable, like not
Yeah,
because of what the Imperials did, but because of what the Mandalorians did in the
yeah.
Civil War 1,000 years ago or whatever, right? Like the surface
Mhm.
of Mandalore has been dead for centuries,
Yeah, that's why
and
they
like,
lived in dome cities and underground
yeah,
because the top was toast.
so this I think that for a lot of people watching, this scene was too understated, right? Like I think certainly for the casual Star Wars fan that's not us,
Yeah.
I think that this scene was way too understated, because I know that when I get there with Crystal, I'm gonna have to explain to her that, like, listen, the Mandalorians wrecked their planet like we're
Yeah.
doing to ours, like how we're doing to ours. They destroyed their own ecosystem. So the
Yeah.
fact that there's grass and fruit and vegetables growing out in the open air on Mandalore is a massive symbol of
Mhm.
the rebirth of the Mandalorian culture. That,
Yeah.
like, not only are they going to return to their ancestral home, they are actually like they're gonna
Recultivating
return.
it.
Yeah, they're gonna return to a way of life that they haven't had for 1,000 years, like
Yeah.
since before basically they started messing with the Jedi, right?
Mhm.
And I it's a lot like how Mustafar in Rise of Skywalker is also wildly understated. That, like, they never say that it's Mustafar, which is a really big problem,
Yeah.
because the last time we were on Mustafar in the story for the movies, it was a lava planet, it was desolate, and it was the place that Anakin Skywalker died and Darth Vader was born, right? Like in
Right.
in truth. And then we come back and it's like there's trees growing on this planet. I didn't realize that trees could grow on
It's a
Mustafar. And it's
separate
like, what?
corner.
Yeah, and it's like, well, actually, like, the planet has been healing since the fall of the Empire, since the Sith disappeared, right?
Mhm.
And now here comes Kylo Ren, and maybe it's gonna mess things up again, maybe not. Yet to be seen, TBD. At that point in the story, right?
Yep.
I and so, like, in a very similar way, like, this is a it mirrors what's happened on Navarro, where, like, Din comes to Navarro, ruins everything, but in ruining everything, Navarro is reborn as this oasis, right?
Mhm.
And the planet actually starts to reflect that, not just the city, but like the whole planet starts to
Yeah.
reflect that. And we're seeing that on Mandalore. So I think the next time that we see Mandalore, we will see that, like, they have reestablished the capital. They're building, right? I don't
Mhm.
think it'll be built. I don't even if we come back and it's like been 5 years or something like that, right? Like, we go tell the Ahsoka story and it takes a really long time, right? And we come back and like, we go, okay, like, there's been a 5 year time jump. They won't have, like, rebuilt the capital, but they'll have, like, they'll have a new capital, right? That sort of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and that it will look very different from the way that it did before, because
Mhm.
this yeah, this plant life. being like the way that I wish I knew the character's name. I don't have it up, but he says like these are like these plants are
Native.
like native to
Yeah.
Mandalore. Like they were here before. Basically what he says is like they were here before us, cuz like the implication is that Mandalore is not um humans aren't native to Mandalore, right? Like humans aren't we don't really in the Star Wars galaxy know where humans are native to. They're like a
Right.
disease. Like they've just kind of spread to all corners of the galaxy. Like we know that Duros are from Duros, right?
Right.
We know that Anzellans are from whatever planet. We know that Zabrak come from uh oh, and now I've lost the name of the planet. But Zabrak aren't even native to Dathomir, right? Like they're native to the planet that they come from. I can't remember what it is. But
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
um but yeah, and the Night Sisters like kidnapped a bunch of them, and that's why there's a bunch of Zabrak on
Yep.
Dathomir that are the Night Brothers, right? So it's like there's a bunch of these ideas in Star Wars of like, you know, these species come from other places, and Mandalorians are humans, but they're humans that settled Mandalore, right?
Mhm.
And I think what we've learned over the course of this season is that Mandalore is a dinosaur dragon planet. I
Yeah.
And there's like these weird six-eyed monkey cavemen that are the native like intelligent species on the planet, but like the humans almost wiped them out, basically like drove them underground.
Yeah.
I they were supposed to, because I think that Din says like they were supposed to be extinct or something. um but obviously they're not. And but like these dinosaurs, like the one that we saw last week, and the mythosaur, and that sort of like those are the native animals to this planet, not humans, right?
Right.
And so when he makes that comment of like these, like this is the native flora, it's like this is the stuff that was here before we were here. Like the planet has, like the plant, like we found it and we've been able to cultivate it and it can grow, and because it belongs here, because it's native to the planet, it like it takes to it, right? Like it's
Mhm.
he's not bragging, he's proud, right? He's like it's
Right.
there's a subtle difference there. If he's not like there's no like look what we did, he's like no, we just found it and gave it a place, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well,
And
what does it
learn to
need?
farm it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, what does it need? Just room to grow. That's it. It just needs room to grow. This is where it belongs, just like we do, right? Like just like the Mandalorians. If
Mhm.
we can learn to live in balance with our own planet, i.e., with each other, united, not fighting one another, which is what this season's been about, right? So,
Right.
um, yeah, I think that scene to me might even be, other than that last shot, it might be my favorite moment in the whole episode, because I was just like, I was sitting there in the middle of the night just like flabbergasted is the use that I word that I used on Twitter. um
Yeah, I
because
was just sad it was
I
so
didn't
short
expect it.
because, like you said, where they get there to hide, and then she's like, "What is grass?" And he's like, "Oh, it's native, and it's always been here, and it just we were learning to farm it, and you just need it to grow." And
Yeah,
then, she has this like, "Oh, this is amazing," and I'm like, "Cool, this is really important and very meaningful." And then they're like, "Oh, hey, our ship's arrived," and they're like, "Oh, okay, we can stop hiding now. Bye."
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
"Wait, no, we gotta talk about this."
yeah. This is one of the first places where last week's episode let this week's episode down, in that they didn't clearly establish, not clearly enough. When I look back at it, I go like, okay, so they did kind of talk about what the plan was, but they didn't clearly establish what the potential threat was,
Mhm.
because it was a twist, right? Because they didn't know that the Imperials were there. We didn't know that the Imperials were there. So there was really no like, when they were like, we're going to send out a scouting party, it was like, well, why? The planet's desolate, right? Like,
Yeah,
what is, because you got to deal with the spider monkey guys. Like, okay, I feel like there's enough of you that you don't have to worry about it. But then it turned out that like, oh, the the capital is, or not the capital, but the forge is like infested with Imperial super commandos. Okay.
Mhm.
So it was a good idea that you guys sent down the scouting party, right? And then the rest of them show up and it's like your reinforcements have arrived. And then they all start like jumping out of the ships as if they have a plan. And I'm like, "Oh, there was like a moment where I was like, "Oh, this was the plan." The plan was we're going to scout ahead and see what the situation is. We know what the situation is now. We have a whole bunch of Mandalorians.
Mhm.
We can handle this. This is what we do, right? So I think that there was an expectation this week that they were going to run back to the fleet and that like the battle would take place with the fleet and with the TIE fighters. But it was like actually the plan all along was we're going to go to the forge and we're going to take the forge, and maybe we don't need to do anything. Maybe we just get there and then we just call everybody and go like, "Hey, let's have a party." But the reality was we got there and there were a bunch of Imperials, so get everybody so that we can wipe out these Imperials and then we'll have a party. I just think that they didn't do a good enough job of establishing that that was the like that there were multiple aspects to this plan, and that there were different ways that it could go, and this was one scenario that we're actually prepared for, right? Like that the Mandalorians
Mhm.
were they're actually not on their back foot. They're actually, it's like, oh no, somebody else has taken the forge, we have to take it back, was always part of the plan. I think it was just a scenario. They didn't go through all of the scenarios. Had they
Yeah.
done that, I think it would have made more sense for us, and it would have been like, and then this little interlude of like, hey, look at this grass, would have been like, okay, while we wait for reinforcements to arrive, we're just looking at some grass, which is hugely important and symbolic and a major plot point. But um, but it's an interlude and not the episode. And the episode is what we got next, which was a whole bunch of Mandalorians rocketing in to fight a whole bunch of super commandos. And I listen, one of the best scenes in all of Star Wars. It always feels hyperbolic from when I say stuff like that when we get to something, but it's like this is now, I was watching the episode going like, I can't believe that this is what we're doing. Not in the sense of like this doesn't make any sense, but in the sense of like the Paul Rudd gif of like look at us, like who'd have thunk, not me, right? Like look at where we are, and that was the thing. It's like I'm looking at this going like, I knew we were going to get to something like this eventually. I didn't realize it was going to be the finale of season 3, right? And
Mhm.
and it is, and this was the war for Mandalore, and it wasn't on the scale that I think some people wanted or hoped for, but I think that for me in my journey with this story, it was as meaningful as it needed to be, as
Yeah.
I wanted it to be, in terms of like when they're rocketing in and Bo-Katan takes out the dark saber and lights it up in front of her and like does the charge,
Yeah.
and then it goes over to like, I think it goes over to Casca and she like whips out her blasters, and then it goes over to the armor and she like bangs her
Holds
tools
up the
together,
hammer.
and I was like let's go guys, like this is about as close to the portals scene as we've gotten in Star Wars. Yeah, like the portal scene from Endgame, right? Of
Mhm.
like this is Mandalorians assemble. Like let's go. It's time to take out these Imperials. And that's where like the episode really flipped for me of like I was like, "Oh, cool. Like we're going to deal with the Imperials by the end of this episode." That's what's happening. Is like I don't think Gideon's making it out of this one. So when he gets fried later, I was like, cool. Like I didn't think it was going to be quite this quick, but and I listen, I don't think he's gone. He cloned himself a bunch of times.
Yeah, I would be shocked if that's
Yeah.
literally the last of him.
Um but he messed up his Darth Vader ascension order. You have to get burnt first and then put into the robot suit, not into the robot suit and then get burnt, cuz now like if you're in the robot suit and then you get burnt, there's really nowhere to go from there, right?
Right?
Like you just kind of you're just a burnt robot man. But yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to discover that like he survived that or there's a clone, or that
Yeah, the
wasn't
plan would be
actually
my guess, yeah.
that Gideon, right? But we'll see. Um,
But that was the other thing that too that felt gamey is, like in game development or something, you have all these crazy ideas you wanna do, but budget and time come to
yeah,
bite you in the butt, and then you have, like, a half-finished game or whatever, and you gotta ship it out, and so you're like, "Okay, let's cut together whatever we've got and finish it out as an ending." And that's kinda what it reminded me of, is, like, there were lots of thread points up to this point that I felt like still needed to be addressed, but they ran out of time or budget
yeah,
or both,
yeah,
and so they were like, "Quick, throw this ending very quickly together. It looks super cool. The end."
yeah, yeah.
So, very
Just
Halo 2.
crash a Star Destroyer into it. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah. But let's talk about Gideon for a minute. So
Mhm.
after Din and Grogu make it through the laser gates, we finally get to see what's in those clone vats, right? And it's funny because
Yeah,
they really labored it, where I was like, are you guys gonna just walk past these? We're not gonna see what's in them. And then Grogu stops and he turns and looks at one and he gets close to it and we see that it's Gideon and that he's got a bunch of clones of himself. I thought the commandos were going to be clones. I thought that one of their helmets was going to get knocked off and we were going to find out that they were all either we were going to see Tem's face or it was going to be Gideon under there,
yeah,
and it's
that
like
had been my assumption. It was that
yeah.
they were
But I think that
whether they were clones of him or not, but they were
yeah. I
clones.
I think that they were just troopers. I think they were just people.
Lame.
Like just like regular stormtroopers. I mean like I like lame because like what a terrible plan of yours is like well, you can't just put Mandalorian armor on anybody. It comes with training and skill, but
Yeah,
in order to be utilized, right? But I so you just put it on a bunch of stormtroopers and they're still just stormtroopers. But narratively, I think it ended up making sense because the Mandalorians come in and it's like the story point here is like you can steal our tech, you can appropriate our culture, but you can't actually become us without
yeah,
becoming one of us, right?
yeah,
Because what we've learned is that like you don't have to be born a Mandalorian to become a Mandalorian, right? Din wasn't born a Mandalorian and yet he is Mando, right?
right.
We call him Mando. Grogu is baby Yoda and yet we consider him a Mandalorian, right?
Mhm.
And he's growing into that. And so like there's this lesson of like you can adopt the culture and you can become a part of it by genuinely being a part of the culture, contributing to it and learning from it. But that's not Gideon's thing. Gideon's thing is appropriation, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a colonizer viewpoint of like we came here, we took your Beskar, we put it on our stormtroopers, and now we're better than you because we
Mhm.
took it from you. And the Mandalorians come in and it's like, and I think narratively, like it has to be that it's like, no, you can take our Beskar and you can put it on, but you cannot be Mandalorians. Mandalorians are Mandalorians and we will win. And they do, right? And like there's the great scene with Casca where it's like she's being chased. I think it was Casca. It's hard to tell cuz she doesn't have anything like special about her armor.
Mhm.
Like they need to if she's going to come back, which I assume she will. I think they need to like stylize her up a little bit so that she stands out from the other Mandalorians a
Well,
little bit
she has
more.
the similar, night owl
The
shaped
night
helmet,
owls,
right?
yeah.
It just doesn't have any markings.
Yeah. But that's what I mean. Like they need to Sabine her up a little bit so that
Yeah.
she's like so that she just stands out a little bit more. But I think it was meant to be Casca. Where it's like she's being chased and she like sort of like cuts the jetpack, slides across the thing and like flips over, falls a little bit and then hits it again and like blasts the guy. And I was
Mhm.
see, like you guys have been using jetpacks for a week. These guys started using jetpacks when they were children, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a big difference here in how Casca uses a jetpack versus how the super troopers are using the jetpacks. Um, and so yeah, like I thought that they did that really effectively. For me, I don't know that everybody was on the same wavelength with that one, which speaks to how effective the storytelling is overall, right? If you
Mhm.
know, some people see it a certain way and other people just sort of see it as a fight. It's it is what it is. But um the I like that Din came out to face down Gideon. He was like, I'm gonna beat you, Gideon." And then Gideon was like, "No, you're not. You can't, because I have all of these advantages of a robot suit. Uh, so I and uh, actual weapons right now. Like Din doesn't have a signature weapon at the moment, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
Um, I hope that he gets one when we see him again. But I the Praetorians come out, and so Din ends up in a fight with them, and and we think he's gonna lose, but then Grogu shows up, and then they fight Grogu and they fight Din, and the IG-12 gets destroyed, but doesn't matter because Grogu's got it under control anyways. This was such a I don't know if cathartic is the right way to say it, but it just this to me was the payoff I think a lot of us have been waiting for with Grogu, since like the end of season one of like, oh no, like this little dude can do it. He
Yeah.
can do it, right? Like he can fight if he needs to. He doesn't want to, but he can. And along with Din, like the two of them, like combo fighting these guys, they managed to take out the Praetorian. And I've seen people be like, "Oh, they nerfed the Praetorians," and it's like, well, first of all, there were like there were like 8 of them in Last Jedi, right? Was there
Yeah.
7 or 8 of them?
There were only 3 this time. I
There were
think
only 3 of them. Yeah,
I'm trying to remember. I think there were 6,
was it
3
6? Was
each.
it like 3-on-3? I feel like
Yeah.
I feel like I man, it's so funny. A million years ago, I would have only exclusively called him Kylo, and I was about to call him Ben, and I was like, but he's not Ben. He is Kylo in that scene.
He is.
I think he takes out like 2 of them pretty quick, and then fights like 2 more for a
Yeah.
while Ray fights 1 and then 2. So
Mhm.
I feel like there's at least 7. I don't know. I'd have to go back and like count it out, but there's a bunch of them. In any case, there's a bunch of them. I and it's and I Ray has still only fought with a lightsaber once at that point. Unless we count pointing it at Luke's face a fight.
I
But
count that, yes.
yeah, a fight that she
That rock
wins.
had it coming.
Yeah. But and that's the thing that I love about that scene so much is that like Kylo is just like housing these guys, but like still overwhelmed because there's so many of them.
Mhm.
And then Rey's like fighting one of them for quite a while and having a not such a great time with it, but manages, right? Like she
Yep.
gets through it. And it was one of those things of like everybody who complains about her being a Mary Sue, and it's like, but this is very clearly blocked to show us that like she's good, but she's not all powerful yet.
Right.
She will be, but not yet, right? And that like Kylo has like a much more prowess with a lightsaber, which makes what Snoke says to him earlier in the movie all that much more effective. Of like, you were bested by a girl who'd never held a lightsaber, and
Right.
it's like, and why? Because he's unbalanced, right? Like
Yep.
it's not because she's better, it's because he was in a real bad spot. But yeah, so Din and Grogu fighting these Praetorians, I I don't think that they expected Grogu to be able to do what he did, and so they weren't prepared for the fight that they were in. They thought that they were fighting Din Djarin and didn't realize that like Din was actually just assisting Grogu.
Mhm.
Right? Because Grogu does some pretty impressive stuff this episode. I and no
Yeah.
and no and
But
no
but
no nap
all his
afterwards.
fighting is very passive
Hmm.
too.
Hmm.
So, I mean, obviously, he's a baby trying not to get killed, so he's jumping
Yeah.
around on ceiling furniture, but, But even when Din comes in to help, all his actions of, like, tripping the Praetorians or pulling away their weapons, they're very passive.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
it
but
it definitely leads to, like, he's become more confident in himself and more, confident and controlling of his abilities, but he's still very, like, "I don't want to be doing this, I'm just doing it to save dad," sort of thing.
it's
It's not like
yeah,
he grabbed, the whip or whatever and was lashing these guys. It was just, "L let me shoot that," "Let me scoot it out of the way while dad shoots you."
yeah. Um it's it read as very like uh like Tai Chi to me
Yes,
in the way that he was
yeah,
doing it, where he wasn't it's not even so much that he was like acting on them, he was redirecting their energy, right? Like
yeah,
it's like, oh, you think you're running in that direction, well, let me just twist this, and now you're falling, right?
mhm,
Like he was just sort of like he was using their own um uh evil motivation against them, right? And I think very similar with what he does with Gideon as well, where it's like he's just sort of allowing them to trip themselves up in a lot of
mhm,
instances. And yeah, which I think is a very like I think it was a very intentional choice. I think like that was like a very like this is how Grogu fights. Grogu doesn't fight by hurting, but by allowing you to make your own mistake, which is a very Yoda thing to do, right? Like
right,
that's a very Yoda way of approaching a battle. And it's
yeah.
very similar to the way that Luke fights Kylo at the end of TLJ, right?
Well
Where
well,
it's
I
like,
think too, for what little I remember of the episode in Book of Boba Fett, that's kind of how Luke was teaching him, was this
mhm,
very passive, self-defense
yeah,
through movement sort of thing, and he shows that he took it to heart, so
yeah, no, I like it, and it reinforces the moment from last week's episode where the Mandalorians are fighting, where Paz and Axe are fighting, and Grogu gets in there and he stops them. He's like, no, right? Like,
Mhm,
I and sort of like teaching them that like, no, we need to stick together, right?
mhm,
And they learn the lesson, and so yeah, I think he's gonna bring a very interesting element to the Mandalorian ideology that it's missing right now. That is something that like this has sort of been one of the lessons of the show is how much the Mandalorians and the Jedi are actually similar, even though they're like sworn enemies, which has always
mhm,
been for me the thing that like the show has painted them very much as like the ninja to the Jedi samurai, right?
right,
The samurai have a higher code of honor than the ninja, and yet they are beholden to the feudal lords that they serve. So if
right,
that lord is evil, then those samurai are evil, right? Which is exactly what happened to the Jedi. The Jedi were beholden to the Republic. The Republic became evil. The Jedi started doing things that were outside of their own ideology, outside of their own ethical code, and became
mhm,
generals in a war that they should never should have, right? That's a very like samurai, like that's it's like that's how the samurai ended up going extinct as well, is that like there were warring feudal lords and the samurai would go to battle with each other because their lords demanded it, even
right,
though like both people on both sides were just fighting for the egos of these lords, right?
mhm,
Which was so against the ideology and the ethos of the samurai. And yet the ninja, who are assassins that you can hire, they value that freedom, like because the a lot of the lessons and the techniques and the skill and stuff like that came out of the teachings of the samurai, but was then adapted for these other means, right? And
right,
so they're they are ideologically opposed sides of the same coin, which is it's such an interesting thing to look at culturally when you look at feudal Japan and how all of that happened, and how ninja came about, and all of that. When you get past the mutant turtles and the Daredevil and all of the stuff that we know ninjas as today because of what the 80s turned them into in pop culture, but when you actually look at like historically the purpose that they served culturally in Japan, it's really fascinating. And that stuff, I don't know, I still don't know if it's intentional or if it's just me putting a layer on top of the Mandalorian Jedi stuff that I want to see there, but at times it feels very intentional. And so then having Grogu be outside of the samurai ethos, because he's not a Jedi in the sense that like Luke is a Jedi, or even like
Mhm.
Ahsoka or Ezra or any of the other Jedi that we know are kicking around at this point in the time period. The type of Jedi that Luke was going to train, and that Ben was, and then obviously fell off the path of.
Mm.
Uh, all of that stuff that's all gone wrong, and the reason why the Jedi quote unquote need to end, right? But that Grogu is like I I Grogu's more of a sage. He's more of a now we're going this is not to conflate Japanese and Chinese cultural iconography, but Star Wars does this, so I think it's
Yeah.
fair. It mixes Eastern and Western philosophy all the time, and
Well,
so there's a
as
lot of
I'm
there.
sitting
But he's
here,
more
it just
Buddha,
kind of
so
dawned on me that, now is his, son learning the ways of being a Mandalorian, and he goes to be selective of his jobs. Well, what do those jobs mean? Is it just strictly bounty hunting or
mhm,
protecting, like he did with Navarro? And from a Mandalorian perspective, it's very much like in your face. As he says, I bring you in cold, I bring you in warm, sort of thing.
yeah,
But what it's being set up for that Din does at the end is he's pretty much teaching Grogu how to defend himself and defend his lands. But if Grogu continues as we've seen him, obviously he's taking that more defensive approach.
mhm,
And so, in a roundabout way, through Mandalorian culture, he will be upholding what was the base rule of the Jedi, which was to, bring about peace and protect the common
yeah,
folk and de escalate,
yeah.
confrontations. I-
Yeah,
And
it
so he'll
it
be bringing about, the true role of the Jedi.
It's exactly, and it's so funny because like, and I think this is why I'm resonating so much with the way that this season ends. Din and Grogu have become what I want Rey's new Jedi Order to be, which
Mhm.
like I think I said this on last week or the week before's episode. In the original draft of the Star Wars, right, the one that got adapted into the comic series that Dark
Mhm.
Horse did right before they lost the license. Um, it depicts the Jedi as less centralized, like less of the sort of like Temple on Coruscant sort of thing, and more as like wanderers, right?
Mhm.
Like almost like Ronin, right? Where they're
Yeah.
they're just kind of out in the galaxy. Like a Jedi has a ship, and maybe he's got an apprentice or two on that ship with him, and they're just going from place to place helping keep
Yeah.
the peace, keep justice, right wrongs, triumph over evil. I like that sort of a thing, and that's what I want. Like that's what I it's my belief that that's what the Jedi are meant to be.
Mhm.
That what we saw them as, what we even see them as in the High Republic, is the beginning of their downfall, like their
Right.
slow creep down towards the fall in the fall of the Republic, right, and the fall of the Jedi
Mhm.
Order, which is like of their own doing. They become attack dogs for the Republic. And that's sort of like, that's the point at the beginning of the Phantom Menace of
Yeah.
like they're being sent in to settle a trade dispute. And it's like, this is supposed to be a diplomatic mission, but immediately we have to fight these people. Why?
Yeah.
Right? This isn't what we're supposed to do. Well, we're doing it for the Republic. What does that mean? Right? And then, but
Right.
in the second movie, it's like the Republic is corrupt. Okay, but we defend the Republic. We defend what the Republic stands for, but the Republic doesn't stand for that anymore. I wonder what that's about. Um, and so by the third movie, when the Republic falls and the Jedi are eliminated as a result, it's like, well, you guys actually created the scenario for Palpatine to do this to you. It's not that Palpatine created the complacency in the Jedi. He took advantage of it, right?
Yeah.
um and so this is what they were always meant to be, was I I like journeymen protectors, which is funny because that's what, when they established the backstory of Boba Fett in the old canon, there was a thing of like, well, Boba Fett used to be this character, Jaster Muriel, who was a journeyman protector before he became a bounty hunter and changed and
Mhm.
became Boba Fett. And then that eventually became like, well, Jaster Muriel is the person who trained Boba Fett. Well, Jaster Muriel is the person who trained Jango Fett, right? And it's like, oh, he's from Concord Dawn. Concord Dawn is the planet. Well, actually, like Concord Dawn is a moon of Mandalore, right? Like
Yeah.
everything's sort of like morphed into this other thing. But that term journeyman protector is actually like so the idea was that Boba was a journeyman protector before he became an Imperial super commando,
Mhm.
which was the term before Mandalorian was thrown in there. Because like obviously nobody says it in Empire, right?
Right.
Um, so it was like there's all of these ideas that are all like sort of out there, and it ties back into what the Jedi were originally meant to be, which was like they're supposed to be out there just going about the galaxy doing good,
Yeah.
right? And like journeyman protector, that's what that sounds like, is somebody who just like goes around the galaxy doing good.
Yeah.
And a gun for hire in a certain way, but like also uh, a gun for hire, a bounty hunter, it like with a heart of gold sort of thing, which is what Din
Yeah.
is. And so I like, that's like, we've now established that. And so yeah, we've got Din, who's this bounty hunter with a heart of gold. He's what the Mandalorian should be. This is what they should strive to be.
Mhm.
um because he's kind and compassionate, empathic or empathetic, I guess. No,
Yeah.
empathic, I think. He's empathic, right? Empathetic
Yeah.
would mean that we empathize with him, but he is empathic. He has very good empathy skills.
Yeah.
And yet, like, if you cross him, he will mess you up, right?
Yeah.
So he's kind of a perfect Mandalorian in that sense. And then we've got Grogu, who's actually representing a pretty perfect Jedi at this point, even more than Luke is at this point, which I
Right.
think is a really interesting thing to look at. So,
I think
I
the other
yeah,
nice thing too is how we will be able to see this Jedi raised um by choice.
yeah,
So all other Jedi, of course, didn't really get the chance to choose whether or not they just got taken. And for Grogu, it was his choice to leave and grow as a person through love. And
yeah,
I think that'll be really interesting to see because it will impact him. Why does he protect and help these people? Well, because he loves it. It's not just a sense of, well, I have compassion for good people and
hmm,
a drive to do good things. That's my purpose. It's he's doing these actions out of love and care, and it's not just sort of like this detached, you know, temple commune sort of thing. It's I've built a community and I have an attachment to these people, and this is why I do the things I do. It gives me purpose, it gives me strength.
yeah,
And which is far more wholesome than just, "Well, I'm here and this is my job." And especially with Din being so understanding of others, or at least trying to be for most circumstances, is that Grogu will learn, not to just pop into somebody's homeworld and be like, "Well, I think you should do this because that's what I deem is right." He's gonna go in with respect that's gonna try and understand the culture to the best of his ability, and then make his decision from there,
Hmm.
um, which would be amazing. That makes a more balanced person,
Hmm.
and with someone who is strong in the Force and, is supposed to be the good protector. Those are qualities that past Jedi lacked that he now has the opportunity
Yeah.
to develop and display.
Well, yeah, and I think it's the stoicism, right? Like
Mhm.
I the Jedi of the old Republic, the Jedi that fell at the end of the Republic, were very stoic. Yoda was very stoic. Yoda continued to be stoic even in isolation.
Mhm.
Um, Although I think that he struggled more with the stoicism towards the end of his life, and so
He was
there's a
just
few
hungry.
moments of emotionality, right? But the purpose of stoicism as a philosophy is to do away with emotional response, right?
Yeah.
You're making responses out of reason and logic, as opposed to out of like your gut. You're right. You're reacting from your mind instead of from your gut. And so, we see a lot of really prime examples of this in the Jedi Order. Mace Windu is the biggest like stoicism red flag out of all
Yeah.
of them, and it's why
Big
he gets
time.
a lot of flack because he's very emotionless, and like to his detriment and to a fault, right?
Yeah.
And Grogu has rejected. He's accepted the path of the Jedi and went to go train with Luke. But then when he is presented with the stoic choice, which is to forsake his family, Din, in
Mhm.
favor of the path of the Jedi, the the lightsaber, right?
Mhm.
um he says no. He rejects it. He rejects the stoicism and says no, family is more important, which is really, really fascinating to me because Luke is the one presenting him with that, where like Luke has not learned his own lesson. He hasn't like although in the moment he made the right choice, and this is really important for everybody to hear. Just because you did the right thing once doesn't mean you are now ascended, right?
Right.
Every day you wake up, you choose to be good or to be bad. Every moment in your life, you choose to be good or be bad. Listen, it's 11 o'clock at night while we're recording this, and every night I choose whether or not I'm going to be tired tomorrow or I'm going to be well rested. And
Oh, it's 2 a.m. here.
yeah, I know, and it's even worse for you. And I am constantly choosing the wrong thing, even though every once in a while I will make the right choice and go to bed at 11 when I should, right? And Luke makes the right choice in Return of the Jedi, faced with a very like ultimate confrontation with the light side and the dark side. In that moment when it matters the most, when the fate of the galaxy is on the line, he makes the right choice, and then he walks away and he's faced with more choices, and he eventually falls down that path. This is funny, as he learns more about the Jedi of old, he becomes more like them and more set in those ways,
Mhm.
until it blows up in his face, and then he runs away to assess, what did I do wrong? And so by the time
Yeah.
that we see him in The Last Jedi, he's been sitting in isolation looking at this the whole time and going like, what did I do wrong? Where did I screw up? Where did I
Yeah.
make the mistake? And that's when he realizes, oh, I tried to reestablish the old Jedi Order. That was a mistake. But instead of him looking at it and going like, so what should the Jedi be, and going from there, which is what I hope and think that Rey will do, and maybe possibly Grogu will be a person who can help guide her on that.
Right.
Um, is that Luke said the Jedi need to be extinguished, right? Like
Mhm.
he adopted the platform of Palpatine, ironically, in his solving of that problem, as opposed to looking at the Jedi and going like, wait, what's the new opportunity here? What should the
Right.
Jedi be? Right. Um, but he has to learn that lesson. And it's really funny to me that like Grogu shows up and it's like he's a Jedi, and what does that mean? Did he die? Like, does he go train with Luke? Does he die in the temple when Ben destroys the temple? Spoilers: Ben's not the one who destroyed the temple, by the way. It
Yep.
was Palpatine the whole time, but he just blamed it on Ben. He just framed him, which is something that they really need to put in like a canon continuity story, not just in a comic
Yes.
book.
Yes,
But
yes, 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 yes.
um, I now we know that like Grogu avoided that fate, a fate that Luke led others to by taking them down the false path.
Mhm.
So like when we see Luke in The Last Jedi and he is broken, he has every reason to be broken, and honestly, he should be broken. He made very bad choices, and it led to the deaths of his apprentices.
Yep.
Right? He repeated the mistakes of the Jedi Order before him, and not only that, he did it in record time. He did it within his own lifetime, within half of his lifetime, really. Whereas it took thousands of years for the previous Jedi to screw up that bad. So,
Right.
um, but he was up against Palpatine, and Palpatine had already done it once to a bunch of Jedi that were actually like a lot better trained and smarter than Luke. So,
True.
you know,
It's true.
it is what it is. But Grogu rejects that path and is saved from that fate. That's such an interesting thing for us to examine now, is that
Mhm.
like what does that mean about Grogu in terms of his path in the Force, right?
Yeah.
Because I believe, and it's reinforced by the way that he fights, that Grogu follows the path of the living Force, the same as Qui-Gon did,
Yes.
right? And like there's a handful of Jedi that we can point to that we can go like, okay, these Jedi, like I think Obi-Wan in the end of his life understood what Qui-Gon was talking about. I don't When he was younger he didn't. I think
Mhm.
it's like the Obi-Wan Kenobi series is actually him coming to terms with that, of him
Yeah.
understanding what the living force is and how it works, which is why Qui-Gon says what he says at the end, which is like, I've always been here, you just weren't ready to see me. Right?
Right.
Like you just, like, your eyes were closed basically, and now they're open, so you're ready to start learning the path of the living force. Grogu's on that path, and yet he is also simultaneously choosing to walk the path of the Mandalore, and that to me is like that moment when he looks down into the water and then we dive to the bottom of that cavern and we see the mythosaur.
Yeah.
It's like there's a
That was awesome.
connection there. Like that is a very, like that is so meaningful. I And it is very much a I in the first Iron Man movie when Rhodey, different Rhodey but still Rhodey, looks at the Mark II and he goes, next time, and he walks away. And it's like okay, Iron Man 2 will have War Machine in it, right? um is very much like, okay, so the next book of Mandalore will have this moment. Like when he's ready, he'll come back. He'll come
Yeah.
back to
Yeah.
the mythosaur, and he'll tame the mythosaur. That's going to happen. It was already foreshadowed in Book of Boba Fett, right? With the
Mhm.
Rancor. It's inevitable. Uh, Grogu will be the one to ride the mythosaur. I have no doubt.
That would be
Um,
amazing.
Bo seeing the mythosaur was the sign that she would be the true leader of Mandalore, like the next leader of Mandalore. But
Mhm.
but Grogu taming the mythosaur, I think, will be like the beginning of the next stage of Mandalore. I And that's because like I think he's gonna lead them on a path away from violence, right? Like that's
Agree.
what the
Yeah.
Mandalorians need to learn, is that like violence isn't the only path. It's not the only solution. I which again is something that is foreshadowed. It's symbolically shown when he stops them from the duel, right? When he's like no, and they stop and they all kind of acknowledge for a minute. It's very brief. They acknowledge like maybe this isn't the right way. Maybe this isn't
Well,
the way.
I
You
mean,
know.
it would, like, counter mirror Vizsla, a Mandalorian learning the ways of a Jedi and then building his own saber that
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily reflect the light like a regular saber would be, but it's this
Yeah.
dark material that becomes heavier with use, and so you must become, be a strong person to commit this violence, and that is the true way of a Mandalorian, is to wield dominance against your foe, and and so that sword became that symbol of leadership, but obviously it's destroyed now, and so they need a new symbol, and it would be very interesting and a bit poetic to have a Jedi who chooses to be Mandalorian, but, you know, befriends as a sign of leadership this natural creature of
Hmm.
Mandalore in order to, you know, whether it's literal or, meaningful in a way of taming this beast
Yeah.
and using it not for war, but just, as a sign of balance. And I think that would be really cool
Yeah.
because there would be no brutal force involved. It would just be like a mutual understanding of nature through the force with the mythosaur.
Yeah. There's so much that this finale sets up for these characters, and it's fantastic. I mean, like, we've barely even talked about Bo-Katan and all of this, but she takes her place as the rightful leader of Mandalore, and
And she's better balanced for it because if you
yeah,
think of her in the Clone Wars and in Rebels, she was not in a position to be a good leader, and
no,
it even shows in The Mandalorian that, she attempted to lead, and because she held to these traditional ideals, she lost it. Um, and I think that was, the two extremes, and, you're a fan of Mary Claire, so the middle path. She has now
yeah,
learned the middle path. She cannot be, you know, a brutal warrior, and she cannot be like her sister, just a pacifist. She needs to learn the balance between when to stand for oneself and when to, you know, take a bow and learn the acceptance in that. And especially, in the episode with Lizzo and Jet Black, she didn't go busting in like Din did and knocking over droids and, demanding things from the controllers. She went in with the purpose of finding out what was wrong and trying to make a
hmm,
compromise like her sister did. And if it came down to violence, sure, she would go about it. But, um, she found that middle way through Din and, you know, growing close to Grogu and seeing this this is what a Jedi is. She knew what the Jedi were, um, and obviously saw those flaws, but now she sees what a Jedi could be or should be, and has taken that in on her own to improve herself. And because of that, she will be a better leader.
yeah, yeah, and I don't know. I just have to say that like everybody going into this week's episode because of last week's episode being called the spies, thinking somebody was going to betray somebody, and then this week, like, no, because I was convinced that Axe was working for the Imperials. I was convinced
Yeah,
of it when he rockets off. I was like, oh, that guy's not coming back for you guys. That guy's coming back. Like, that guy is going to go sabotage the ship or whatever. He lands
yeah.
on the ship, and it's like he's going into the ship, and he's like I'm almost there. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're almost there to mess stuff up. And then he lands and he's like, you guys, everybody evacuate the ship. They're sending a bunch of TIE fighters. I'm like, yeah, of course. You want them off of the ship so that you can start firing on theirs and like help the TIE fighters. And then everybody leaves, and then the TIE fighters get there a minute later, and he starts getting the guns ready, and I'm like, wait, how is this betraying everyone? And then he
Yeah.
starts fighting the TIE fighters, and the TIE fighters are attacking him, and he's just like being a good guy. And I'm like, oh, he didn't betray them. Oh, okay. And then
I was
he
glad to be
crashes the
wrong.
Star Destroyer. Yeah, I was so happy to be wrong that actually no, it turns out that like there is no twist.
Yeah.
There is no dramatic death in this week's episode. The dramatic death was last week's episode. It was Paz Vizsla.
Yeah.
And I think that people discounted that character's journey this season, which is unfortunate, because I do think it was actually really well done. That like when he stood up and said to the rest of the Mandalorians, they're asking us to go do this. They're asking us to lay down our lives again. Why? Because we're Mandalorians. That's why. This is the
Yeah.
way. I follow Bo-Katan into you know, the pits of hell,
For the bigger
because
cause,
yeah,
yeah.
like because that's what we do. That's because we're Mandalorians, you guys. We fight because we're Mandalorians, and it's the way. And I was like, okay, like this dude, like he is on our side now. He's no longer an antagonist. He's
Mhm.
now he's now an ally, and that's because like Din and Bo have won him. And I mean, like Din won Bo, right? Like he won her
Mhm.
over. Like Bo was like, I don't like you. I don't like the way you look. I don't like the way you talk. I don't like your friends. I don't like anything about you. But I need you right now, so come help me do this thing. And that's what they do. And then he comes like later. She's like, I'll help you, but I want the dark saber. You took the dark saber. I don't like you. And then it
Yeah.
was like, but he's in trouble, and she goes and helps him. And then by the end of the season, she's like, I don't know, I think I kind of like that guy. Like, right? I still think it's in the offing, like the two of them making the helmet smoochies. But I don't know, we'll see. But yeah, she's in such a good place now. I love it, and I can't wait to like pop back after a time jump and see her as like, leading Mandalore, and Mandalore flourishing under her,
Yeah.
under her leadership, and to see where that goes, and how that works out. um and yeah, I don't know, this episode just, it really worked for me. It really worked for me. And yeah, there were the logical inconsistencies, right? I found the
Mhm.
tweet. It's from Lori Kerwin Ashman, and she had posted like a tweet that was like, the finale was like so great, basically is the tweet. And then she's like, also me post finale, emotionally sated, logically confused. And I was like, yep, 100%,
Perfect.
100%.
Perfect.
But when they show up on Navarro, and Din's like, I got you a present, and it's IG-11 restored,
Yeah.
and now he's the marshal. I love it. It's fantastic. It's great. I What growth for Din, and a great boon for Navarro. It's that thing in the hero's journey that these heroes' journeys keep missing, and I just like, I know that Ty from Wit and Folly, like Ty Black, that she's fallen off of Mando because of season 2, and I don't
Yeah.
think that she even watched Book of Boba Fett or anything.
No,
But
I don't
and
think she did.
I understand why, but she is always saying like, this is the piece of the hero's journey that they're always missing, and Marie Claire always reiterates this as well. I that like, this is, you have to bring the elixir back to the village, right?
Yeah.
And this scene is Din bringing the elixir back to the village, right? Like he's gone off into the galaxy, and he's learned all of these things about himself, and he hated droids. And then, but like, he
Yeah.
went out of his way to like restore. He made a deal with with the New Republic, in order to restore this droid and give them what they need, which is a
Right.
protector, right?
Right.
Um, it's like he's like duplicated himself so that he can always be there to protect them.
And to acknowledge that this place had value
Mhm.
enough, you know, to protect it as
Yeah,
well. I don't think he would have thought or cared about such a
yeah,
thing in season 1.
yeah.
So,
Certainly not of Navarro, right?
but yeah, definitely not.
Like it was such a like the only thing on this planet is Mos Eisley, and we know what we think about Mos Eisley, right? So,
Yeah.
I yeah, I such a transformation. It's fantastic. Um, yeah, I loved it. It just that emotionally sated is just such a perfect way to put it. I and that last shot, Din walks out, he sits down in front of his little house, puts his feet up, and he's just watching the kid play.
Yeah,
And it's just like, ah
it was
man,
a great
I just
ending.
it it Star Wars needed a happy ending so bad. And it doesn't have to be it doesn't this doesn't have to mean an end to stories, but a happy ending to this story,
Mhm.
it means a lot. It means a
Yeah,
lot that like these two characters who met under these really like uh uh, conflict laden circumstances have now found peace and have the ability to be a family and a part of a community and to grow and learn and become better people. It's like that was the point. That's what this was all about. That's
right.
what that's what the original trilogy was about. And then we come back in the Force Awakens and we go, oh no, it was all a waste,
Yeah.
right? And that's fine. Like it's not that's I don't really have a huge problem with that as long as that was going somewhere and then it didn't, right? But and it will. It'll come back around. And everything that they've done in the Mandalorian and they're gonna do in Ahsoka and Skeleton Crew and all this stuff that's going on with Carson Teva, and the Adelphi Squadron, like it's we're establishing why the New Republic was never going to be the thing, was never going to be the solution, and why the new Jedi or like Luke's new Jedi were never going to be the thing. Because that's because and it's obviously it's retcon, right? It's going back and it's fixing it after the fact in order
Yeah.
to make it make sense. But it's doing exactly what the Clone Wars did for Revenge of the Sith. It's like that we are in people keep going like, oh, I can't wait for them to do a series that blah blah blah. And I'm like, guys, we're in it. We're in the
Yeah.
middle of it right now. Because all of these episodes that are about like, hey, I think actually the New Republic might be as bad as the Empire. It's just all they did was switch the power from one hand to another. And like
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that Mon Mothma isn't trying to make it something better, that Leia's not trying to make it something better, but go read Bloodlines.
Well, I mean, it's the same repetitive thing, right? So the new republic is like, well, the empire was bad. Let's try and go back to what we had before because that was good.
Yeah.
Well, it's all if you're only going to repeat what failed in the first time, you're probably going to fail a second time,
Yeah.
and that's what happens. Um, and the same thing with the Jedi. Luke's like, well, I need to restore this order that did things this way. I'm going to do them this way.
Yeah.
And it failed again. And I think that's the nice thing about the way this ends is because, you know, people have learned their lessons and they have learned that what was happening before clearly wasn't working and there needed to be changes. And they've taken the time to reflect on those
Hmm.
lessons and been like, okay, perhaps this is a better way to bring about change, to understand and understand and respect that past, but to not make the same mistakes. So it was nice to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I feel like I could talk about all of this stuff forever, but I think that we can wrap it up there. I think we've done a good job in
Okay.
this episode talking about it. Yeah, I loved it. I love this season. This I tweeted last night. and it's been almost 24 hours now, and I still feel the same way. This season of The Mandalorian has been some of my favorite Star Wars since Rebels concluded. Um, like there's one other major bright spot in there for me, and that's Solo, which I feel like had a very similar spirit to Rebels, and I think this season had a
Yeah.
very similar spirit to both of those things. And so it's made me really really happy as a Star Wars fan to return there, especially after going to the dark place with Andor last year.
Yeah.
Which, like, again, like, I will keep saying, like, Andor is great and I love it. I can't wait for season 2. I think it's going to be fantastic. I and it has its place in Star Wars. I just want to once again say, like, that's it. It should not be when people say, like, oh, why can't all Star Wars be like this? Because then it wouldn't be Star Wars, you guys. There's nothing hopeful about Andor, right?
Mhm.
I burned myself for a dawn that I'll never see, or whatever the hell he says, whatever Luthen says. It's like that's not hopeful, you guys. That's not hopeful. That's a very very cynical way of looking at revolution, right? Is that like, well,
Yeah.
I'm going to become as bad as the bad guys so that other people can reap the rewards of my sin, right? And it's like, no, that's not really how that works. That's not really how that works. um it's certainly not the message of that's not how we win, right? Like, what Rose says. um because
It's
it
a
is,
different take on the self-sacrifice.
yeah, it's look, this is the thing, not to get all Andor in the last couple minutes of this, but Luthen Rail is not a hero. He's not an anti-hero.
No.
He is a villain. He is actually the villain of that story. I don't even think that, like, Dedra or Cyril are the villains of that story. I think that both Dedra and Cyril are victims of the Empire, no different than Cassian. Which is why I think a lot of us were like, "Oh, she's going to defect at some point." I firmly believe that in by the end of season 2 that Cyril and Dedra will have joined the Rebel Alliance, but because they'll realize that it's actually the Empire that's the problem, not the people, not the citizens, right? Because that's the line that they're being told right now. But Luthen has this ideology that he is somehow better than everybody else. And
Mhm.
that's no different than Palpatine. It's no different than Palpatine. He is a phantom menace. He just happens to be on the good guy's side right now, but
Yeah.
like, he's willing to sacrifice lives that are not
To get
his
what he
own
wants.
in
Yeah.
or in order to put things in position so that maybe one day they can do something meaningful, right?
Yeah.
And like, and his whole thing of like, no, we have to make it worse in order for it to get better, in order for the galaxy to wake up. Well, that's very similar to Palpatine's plan to take over the galaxy in the first place, which
Mhm.
was, we have to drive the galaxy to war in order for them to give me the powers that I need to reorganize the Republic into the Empire, right? And so we need to sow fear. We need to create chaos. These are all the same things that Luthen does. He's a villain. He is the bad guy in the series, and people don't get that, and that's cool. Listen. It's an awesome story. That's super cool. It's just not the kind of Star Wars I want all the time, right? I want other Star Wars. And we got it. We got it with Mando this season, and I'm so happy that we did. That we got Star Wars that was like, actually, the way that we win is by loving each other. That is the way that we win.
Mhm.
And when I this is sort of the final thought. When I Gideon. See, we went so long with nobody having any names that now it's hard to remember everybody's names. When Gideon destroys the dark saber or whatever, and he's having his little speech of like, "See, you Mandalorians are nothing without your gadgets," and
Yeah.
it's like, and she's like, "Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, that's not what Mandalorians are. Mandalorians are stronger together, right?" And Like that's the lesson this season. That was like
Yeah.
it's I love it when the story states its thesis. It's one of my favorite things. And that moment is this season's thesis. Like that's what it was about bringing together all of the
Yeah.
factions, a faction we didn't even know existed in the survivors, right?
And it was nice to see her learn that lesson
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. And the payoff of it of Din and Grogu coming to save her, and then they don't defeat Gideon, right? Gideon's hubris defeats Gideon, which is always the best villain death. It's such a Disney death. It's like Clayton strangling himself at the end of
Oh, oh
Tarzan,
yeah.
which is my favorite. That's my favorite Disney villain death. I mean, Tarzan's also my favorite Disney animated movie, but I love that it's like that Tarzan's trying to save him, and in the struggle to continue to hurt Tarzan, he kills himself. And it's like
Mhm.
Gideon's so caught up in his own thing that he doesn't get out of there when everybody else does, and he dies, presumably. I he's enveloped by this explosion of what was his own light cruiser, right?
Yep.
Come back to haunt him. But Grogu protects his family. But the two of them, the moment before that, fully knowing that this is not gonna, this little shield and Din's body are not, they're gonna try, but they're gonna try because Mandalorians are stronger together, and then Grogu saves the three of them,
Yep.
in the best family portrait of all time. I It's just like what, like I don't know, like it just, did they do a bunch of stuff sort of wonky and clunky this season? Absolutely, 110%. Couldn't agree more. Was it all worth it for that moment? Yeah, this is like a top 5 moment in Star Wars for me. Like it just, like that image of the three of them is going to be seared into my mind for a very long time. Pun intended on that one. So, um, I loved it. Great season. One of my favorite things since Rebels. I'm very excited for Ahsoka, which is the next thing that's coming up.
Mhm.
Um, and I know that there's some, there's some thoughts and stuff like that around Rosario Dawson and stuff. I kind of talked about it last week, but last week, the week before, last week, I think. But and we'll talk more about it in the lead up to Ahsoka. I, but I'm still very excited for the show.
Yeah,
But
same.
between now and then, we will be back with uh with Obi-Wan recaps. So I guess I'll just announce it here because I just talked to him about it today, and he's down. So Marty, who was on a couple of weeks ago, um, he's gonna come on, and the two of us are gonna do all 6 episodes. So we're gonna go week by week. We're gonna do 6 episodes as if the show was coming out, basically, and we're gonna start on the 1 year anniversary of Obi-Wan. So look for that on or around May 27th. It'll either be just before May 27th or on May 27th itself. We'll put out that first episode of our Obi-Wan. I guess now it's like a retrospective because we already know what happens. We're just rewatching it and then talking about it again. But I'm really excited to dig back in. But this is the last episode until that happens. So basically, I'm taking about a month off of Forced Perspectives. That said, Rebel Cells will be back to talk about Star Wars Vision Season 2 and to cover Young Jedi Adventures. Depending on what that looks like will depend on what those episodes end up being. So I don't know exactly what we're gonna do, but we are gonna cover it because it is Star Wars animation and it looks pretty good. It actually looks like it's gonna be a lot of fun. So
Mhm.
um, I hope that there's some worthwhile stuff in it. It's not just kids stories, but that there's a couple of like meaningful Star Wars moments. But we'll see. We'll see what it ends up being. And my expectations are not high. I just expect to have some fun. But yeah, Rebel Cells will be back. I early in May, because those both drop on May the 4th. So I expect that. And who knows? Because they might drop something on us that necessitates an episode of Force Perspectives. But But if not, we'll be back then, and then we'll have a couple of other episodes because I got some people that want to come on and talk about stuff, about some other things. And then we'll be back for Ahsoka. So, uh, yeah, I mean the rest of the year looks awesome. Oh, we've also got Jedi Survivor. You mentioned it earlier.
Yeah.
That Jedi Survivor is basically a week away.
Mhm.
Uh, and
I'm reading through Battle Scars currently, but I'm definitely looking forward to
yeah,
Survivor for sure.
I'm trying to get through Battle Scars. The book is good. The audiobook, I don't I'm not a big fan of this narrator. Um
Ah,
I I really don't like the way that they're characterizing Cal. Like it's like the guy exists. Act like him, please. The writing is there, but the performance is like way off. And it's kind of
oh,
bothering me. But
yeah, I'm
um
reading it on my Kindle, and at least through the book in my mind, it fits him really well. Like, I can
yeah.
see, um
Um I'm really enjoying all of the Marin stuff
yeah,
that's in it. I think it's really really interesting. Um, it's one of those things that I wish really 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 wish wasn't hidden in a tie-in novel to a video game.
yeah.
But Acolyte's coming next year, so everybody relax. I don't worry. Leslie Headland's gonna make Star Wars plenty gay for all of us. But anyways, um,
Confetti and streamers.
yeah, I the High Republic is the perfect setting to do it in. I really hope that that there's like a like female Sith, female Jedi entanglement in Acolyte. I'm getting
You
the
never
feeling that
know.
that's what we're leading towards, but I really hope that that we have the light and dark sapphic romance going on in that
That
show.
would be awesome.
That's my hope for that one. That would be really really cool. But yeah, so Jedi Survivor, obviously like it comes out next week, but like it's gonna take
Yeah.
some time to play through it, and I want to respect everybody's varying degrees of commitment to video gaming. Um, I will probably beat the story within a week or two, but I'm sure that other
Same.
people won't. But I'm gonna like take a day off of work to play it and do all sorts of stuff to get
I
to get
finished
as much
Fallen
time.
Order in 4 days, but
Yeah.
I mean, I play for hours in a row, so
Oh
that's
yeah,
only
that's the
why.
thing. Yeah, I'm gonna play until my eyes hurt and then go to sleep.
Uh-huh.
And that'll be like the Thursday night, right? Like get up the next morning and play. But I so we'll probably do our Jedi Survivor breakdown like after the Obi-Wan stuff because that'll give everybody plenty of time to play through it and read Battle Scars and play through it again and play through Fallen Order again. And we'll do like a whole Fallen Order Survivor Battle Scars uh, roundup sort of thing. But
Very nice.
yeah, awesome. Well, Danielle, thank you once again for
Yeah, no
coming and
problem.
being on the show. I love it when we can talk Star Wars. I think that we got some cool places tonight. This one, I hope everybody else enjoys it. Anything that you want to plug? You want to tell people where to go read your fan fictions?
Sure. If you wanna reach out and chat, I'm on Twitter mainly, 87 Zoo Lemons. And then if you feel like reading some Raylo and Elder Scrolls fan fiction, you can find me as Danny Marie on AO3.
Awesome. I thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for sticking with us through season 3 of Mandalorian and into the future. We really appreciate it. Of course, if you have enjoyed the season and you feel like supporting us in a very like tangential, not tangential, tactile way, I don't know, like a very real way, then you can head over to patreon.com/thunderquack and support us over there. You'll get like we're not doing any bonuses or anything like that for Forced Perspectives on the Patreon right now, but you will get early access to the Thunderquack Perfect 10, which is a podcast that I do over there. about things that generally are not Star Wars, although Star Wars almost always comes up because it has to. You get access to the Perfect 10 Pop Quiz, which is a companion trivia podcast that we do, that Tim Dipple does for us over there. So every episode of Perfect 10 is about like a different thing that I bring on a guest and I ask them to pick a perfect 10. Danny, you came on and did Avatar. We talked about Avatar, which was super fun, a great episode. And so then the Perfect 10 Pop Quiz is a companion podcast. It's about a 6 or 7 minute episode usually that that is 10 trivia questions about that topic, which is super fun. And then I also do a solo podcast that is a Patreon exclusive. So every other week, or at least I try every other week to do a podcast that we call Off the Record. That's just me. It's just me talking to myself about something that I like usually. Yeah, I those are all now bonuses that are available. I got rid of all of the tiers. There's just one tier. It's $5, all rewards. Cause I like that whole like, oh, you only get to listen to this podcast if you pay us $10 a month. Well, is that podcast worth $10? Like, well, no, but if you put all of the rewards together, I think it's worth $10. And it's like, you know what? I just want everybody to hear all of the cool stuff that we're doing. So if you support us at $5, you just get all of the bonuses now, which also includes access to our exclusive members only section on our Discord server. So if that's something that sounds cool, then do that. Just join the Thunderquack Discord server anyways. Like, it doesn't cost anything to join the Discord servers. You just go to thunderquack.com/discord. We talk about Star Wars in there a lot. So if you're here because you like Star Wars, which why would you be listening to this podcast if you didn't? I don't know. But we have a lot of fun Star Wars conversation over on the Discord, and the more the merrier. So join us over there. And yeah, I think that's it. That's all. Those are all the things that I'm going to plug at the end of this episode. It's just sort of, I don't talk about that stuff a lot on this show because it's not really directly affected, except for the fact that like the server and like for the podcast episodes and like like all of our everything that is required to run a podcast network the way that I do is all funded by the awesome 35-ish people on Patreon supporting us. So yeah, the more people that support us over there, the more cool stuff we can do. But yeah, hugely appreciate any support that you guys can give us. And money is not the only way to support us. You can also just go review us on your podcast service or whatever and recommend it to a friend, and all that sort of stuff is also massively helpful in supporting the podcast. So thank you to everybody who does all that kind of stuff as well. Mm-hmm. But that's it for this episode. It's 11:38, which is a great time to end. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to Thunderquack Force Perspectives. Our opening theme is composed for us by Christy Carew. Follow Force Perspectives on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ForcePOV, and join us on Discord at thunderquack.com/discord. Support the show by visiting us at patreon.com/thunderquack to get early access to episodes, leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast service, or buy merch at store.thunderquack.com. Force Perspectives is a part of the Thunderquack Podcast Network.